Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Thursday, September 5th, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. Well, it's been a few days, and I missed you guys. Honestly, kills me not being here when all the stuff going on around and being right here. I miss this when I'm distracted by everything else and all the things that feel like they're trying to pull me away from doing this job. So good to be back here. A lot to talk about today. We're going to focus on to, excuse me, to come out of the gate quickly here. A couple of things that I want to highlight around something in my throat all of a sudden. Technocratic regime change. So one story that I found really, really interesting from Honduras that you might have seen, might have slipped under the radar. Sort of what at least as they're framing it as sort of a libertarian paradise, or at least that's how it was proposed. And now it's in this weird kind of adversarial state with the state of Honduras. And guess who's behind this libertarian paradise city? People like Peter Thiel, and a lot of overlaps that I find really interesting, which I begin to see, which I've been seeing, but more so with this kind of noticed this growing. Well, we've all been highlighting the growing like technocratic problem, the technocrat, like the as I think Matt Arrett and I discussed in the past, kind of the resurfacing of the reality of who ultimately pulls a lot of the strings in the way the world functions. And today we see this kind of technocratic elite or elitists, as I would see them, stepping back out into the light. And now what I'm seeing is this kind of a new dynamic around regime change. Now, that's just the way that it get the impression that I get from it. The story in and of itself is crazy and important to see how these technocratic oligarchs are seemingly pulling, major moves around the world that you could argue are just their own personal profiteering and actions, or see the outlines of power structures that we're not supposed to identify the way that they are. More so see this classic idea of representative governments and people being voted into position. In reality, it's something quite different. And I think we're all beginning to become uncomfortably aware of that. So I wanted to highlight that story and how important that was around the other conversations we're going to have, starting with an interesting one, interestingly timed as well, around the conversation as we're talking about a new kind of just loose network of overlapping people that we see as being primarily objective, and I argue more nonpartisan than you would otherwise see, but really that's my personal opinion. But being objective, being a focal point, being around three main topics that we see kind of pulling people out of the thinning the crowd in regard to people we see as at least doing everything they can to be objective and accurate in every way possible. That is, again, I say it like that only because we all make mistakes from time to time. The point being obviously around COVID-19, Israel, Palestine, and the two-party illusion, and the very important consistency around that, and this independent media alliance we've been discussing that we're in the background putting together right now, and not something that has any funding or likely ever will, or something that is being organized by some background influence. No, just the three of us decided we want to work with people that we agree with, and we want to work with people that we see as objective and to a fault, as we've talked about, as I jokingly say about myself, at a time when I thought it was necessary, irritatingly objective, at a time when it seems that word doesn't mean anything to some people. So today we're going to talk about tenant media, an overlapping conversation around the DOJ indictment, and a lot of right-wing influencers that are getting kind of wrapped up in this conversation. I'm not even happy with the way the title frames this, in the title that I created, because I just don't feel like it does it justice. And we're going to talk about this today, because I don't think you guys are, many of you might see be able to guess where I might go with this. But it's not going to be what anybody in the paradigm might expect, because it's either at this point people framing it as, Russia influencing the right, which I just simply wildly too simplified, if at all, what's going on. And then the other side, you might see it at, I don't want to, I'm trying to avoid these days of framing the party side of it, because as you know, my opinion is it's more illusion than anything. That's not to say that people don't have those opinions. I'm trying to kind of train myself to get away from that, because even though I can see it clearly in my mind, I don't want to paint it as a kind of couched picture where these people think that, these people think this, because I really don't feel that way. But we all know those categories exist, largely with the manipulation, I would argue. But it's important to see how interesting this is, a conversation about what at least the government's telling us, Russian-backed, state-backed, not just a Russian company, but state-backed, which that's going to be a point I make important, that that's just their statement about what they think RT is. That's the company involved in this. backing Republican media to exorbitant amounts of money that it's going to blow your mind, the amount of money that's throwing at these people. So that's the other part of it for me. Why are these people not suspicious about this? And I think the obvious point that I think you might expect from me is that because these are a lot of what I would see as the mainstream alternative media crowd, they just don't really care. Obviously, I think some of them care some more about the truth than others, but I think a lot of it just shows you that it's this massive just mire of profiteering and opportunism. And a lot of times people do their best to get the truth out when they're doing that. But how important it is to recognize the difference between what I see, what we're trying to build, what we're doing, and people that we see doing the same, and people that I see in that crowd, and then obviously far to the other side of this, where it's just about manipulation, control, brainwashing. But we'll get into all of this. But we're also going to talk about some Israel conversation if we have time around the West Bank and others that I think are very important, but that might get pushed off depending on time. So let's start with a couple of articles that just came out that Derek and I'll probably talk about this more as it gets closer, as we've already talked about this at least twice in interviews. He's written at least 3 articles, but I didn't want you to miss this. The summit of the future is only weeks away, yet the public remains ignorant. Now, what's crazy about this is something that is seemingly, like the way I framed it at the very least, is this has all the same hallmarks of everything that the previous discussion did. This pandemic accord, and none of which has even remotely gone away, but it was very clearly focused on by a lot of us as a problem. And I think that this is sort of a subtle way to do the exact same thing in a different way, or even sort of the same way, but in a more of a subtle, abstract way that's not getting as much attention. Either way, it's all under the same umbrella. The WHO, the United Nations, the same direction, about just simply, it's a step in the direction of globalism, of global government, which, by the way, is one of their talking points around these discussions. The Global Governance Summit, they've already had these. This is not a secret. It's not a conspiracy theory. So it's important to understand what this is really trying to accomplish. Now, even if you want to take them at face value and not read into what the control might become, which it always literally does throughout history, even what they're putting forward should be concerning with what we just went through around COVID-19, the illusions therein, the technocratic control structures building everywhere, and maybe they even believe it's for your best interest. But it's absolutely counter to liberty and freedom and everything we pretend, and I'm talking about the partisanship out there, that we're fighting for. So make sure you check this out. Make sure you're staying abreast of what's happening here. We will talk about it more. Derek's going to New York to be covering this as well as a few other things. You expect some live coverage there. Again, that's what TLAV brings to the table without anything other than just our interest in doing so. You can support us if you wish. We're going to do this anyway. That's important to think about in the context of all the other stuff, especially the story we'll get into to start. Also, if we have time, I'll bring this back up more as if we go into it deeper today, but I want to make sure you saw it out of the gate. Robert put up this article, Israel launches a war on the northern West Bank. Great information in this, kind of breaking down some of the pieces that you might not have seen around the larger conversation. I mean, if you're even hearing this at all, frankly, from the Western media, which is mind-blowing to me. Now, Operation Defensive Shield in the past, I think 2002, if I remember correctly, was regarding the West Bank as well as other locations. But the point, or I guess just West Bank in general, but the point being, the way that this is happening and the time that it is now with what else is going on, I find this to be an unprecedented move. Because it's incredible to me. This is one of the final moves of them trying to officially take all of this territory, which, by the way, we've all been telling you they were going to do. So just pay attention, because it's outrageous. It's illegal in everybody's mind, even the United States, and nobody seems to care. And everyone's framing this as some sort of ongoing skirmish. I mean, it's like saying a murderer killing their victim is somehow an ongoing combat. No, it's an illegal act from a murderer killing somebody, and that's what we're talking about here. This is an illegal occupation. It's an illegal act in general, a legal displacement. Everything they're doing from top to bottom is illegal, even Gaza, by the way, but just brushed off by the very people trying to halfway tell you they care about Gaza. Recognize that. And a few other overlapping points we'll get into around Israel, as usual, that seem to be immersed in these conversations. That's not just because it's a coincidence or it's an accident. It's because Israel is wildly immersed in all of these different manipulations, trying to convince you, paying attention out there, specifically America, to think something very, very clear, always in the interest of their agenda, usually to the detriment of American interests. It's not my opinion. It's easy to look up through history, and I've got some points we'll make as we go through. But let's come back to this. This is actually really interesting. I mean, these days I rarely write notes down before the show, because I find that just kind of pulls me out of the zone, and I like to be in the flow. And sometimes that means I miss points. The reason I'm saying this is because there were so many things about this that I'm like, my mind was all over the place. the basics, the usual right in the beginning, which we'll get into, but then all these other interesting things. And I hope I get to them. My point in saying that is there's so many directions that could go in. And the first thing we should start with, why in the world would anybody at this point, left or right, or just aware that it's all ridiculous, that your government would tell you the truth about anything at this point? Now, maybe the truth, if it aligns with their interests, of course. So it's always possible that this could be the truth, but it's actually crazy to me. So they come out and say, for those that are just now hearing the story, that there are employees from RT, the Russia Today is what it used to be called. They claim it's a state-backed entity, but the point would be, I'm sure that's even probably true in the same context that every platform in this country is so obviously state-backed influence at the very least, especially plenty of them that are just literally state-controlled, and they know that, but they frame it differently. Like these different, I mean, even the concept of like our U.S. aid and National Endowment for Democracy for foreign policy. We all know what those things are actively doing. They say it themselves, but then they just call it humanitarian aid. Same kind of game. So let's not pretend like we don't all know that Fox and CNN and the rest of them are very clearly, 90% of them, if not all of them these days, have former, in major air quotes, intelligence assets literally on their panels all the time. They are government assets at this point. Whether you want to talk about Operation Mockingbird or whatever else. Smith Modernization Act, all these things have led to the control of these concepts. Maybe the talking heads and they don't even know that. So when they're pointing at RT and saying state-backed, it should at least cross your mind whether that is the full picture or whether it's just another. And I'll be honest, plenty of the media over the years, and the point is this is not about being pro-Russia. It's just about being pro-facts. Russia Today, or rather RT now, has been far more accurate around a lot of the conversations around the Ukraine war, around the United States. Of course, you could frame that as because I share that opinion and maybe you were both wrong. Yeah, it's certainly possible, but I'm objective enough to say that. But it's not about because I side with Russia or I side with the United States. I think both of their governments are problematic. And the bottom line is the facts matter. Ukraine has been caught 100, not to be facetious or rather hyperbolic about it, but I can't even count. I'm sure Israel at this point has passed the amount of times, but during the focus on Ukraine, it was unreal how flimsy and obvious those lies were. So, because the point I'm saying that is this story overlaps with the Ukraine coverage and so on. They make a big point about that. But at the end of the day, it's certainly possible that the platform, the entire thing could be completely run by Russia. Now, that's totally different than the conversation about what the people who were being funded were doing. Now, the way that this ultimately went is they were funding these media entities, or specifically Tenant Media, which is a Tennessee-based platform that I think I've heard of them. I don't think we've ever referenced them. I don't think we've ever... honestly, I haven't seen them be that prominent, quite frankly. That's also one of the points of this whole thing is they don't seem to have that much reach in the bigger scheme of things. And so the money is one of the interesting parts of it. To be clear, I think it's very obvious there's something very fishy happening here. I'm not sold on the idea that it's entirely Russia or Russia Today even, that there might be some other angle to this. But either way, it's obvious that these people were taking shockingly high amounts of money for very low output. Anybody, anywhere, with a conscience would have been like, well, maybe something's weird is going on here. So I very much have concern about the way that nobody on the side of whether it's Tim Pool or Dave Rubin or all these people who are wrapped up in all this, they should have known better. At the very least, it shows you that they didn't seem to care. And that has to make you ask about everything else going on. Who else is funding them? And the point is the influence is there. And this shouldn't be a right-wing, left-wing point, guys. This is about media and its influence, whether it's U.S. State Department, whether it's Russia State Department. These groups are always trying to influence content, or Israel for that matter. So the first point I really want you to think about is the fact that people like us, or plenty of other media platforms out there, who actively do their best to remove themselves from these political dynamics and try to objectively cover the facts. Objective, nonpartisan. We don't take funding from just anybody who throws money at us, and we're very, very transparent about how that works, whether it's TLAV or Unlimited Hangout or Conscious Resistance or all of us together and what we're trying to do. The reality being that this needs to reflect on these people, even if they were caught up in, innocent, as they're trying to frame this, and they were just kind of played by some outlet. Okay, that's certainly possible. I'm not going to say that they were wrapped up in some criminal enterprise. I don't know that, but it has to show you that these people are more so interested, at the very least when it comes to high enough amounts, than taking the money and as this will show, being influenced to do certain content. And that's not synonymous with journalism or objectivity. So I want to make that clear. And I would say the same thing about left, and I have over the years, or any other media doing so. So let's go through this, and I find this interesting other than that about what else might be driving this. I mean, it really could just be as simple as Russia's government wanting to influence content in the United States. But then the question has to become, was it fake? Was it false? Were they lying? Even if they did, then would that matter? Now, yes, it would if it was a government thing. That's where we get into the FARA Act and overlapping with how they completely ignore that when it comes to Israel and plenty of other governments. They don't mind influencing your opinion directly, explicitly. AIPAC is a Israeli government content aspect or group. Whether they say that or not, I've proven this 14 times in the show. It ties directly back to a government Israeli thing that they created. They changed the name twice, and on the record said it's because they didn't want them to be seen as the middleman for Israel. That's AIPAC today. So the point is, if this is coming from Russia today as a company, and let's just say for sake of conversation, it's not, and we take this down since I'm just talking right now, it's the sake of conversation that it's not Russian government influenced. Why would that be a crime? Isn't that just another company somewhere in the world trying to influence creators? Now, yes, for a ridiculous amount of money, like $100,000 a video. It wouldn't be a crime, though, technically, other than the fact that the U.S. government says sanction because we say they're government. Well, okay, so these things should matter to an objective person. Or even if you think the government funding that, there's a question in there about free speech and so on. But my opinion is still, when it comes to a government, the same way I would say about Israel or Russia or China or anybody else, there's a crime being committed there. That's a government influencing policy, influencing opinions. That's the FARA Act right there. And even if you disagree with that, we have to acknowledge the law. And we can discuss that, right? That's the same conversation I have every time. So it's interesting to think about that, because now this is being put out there, which I promise you is going to lead to calls for censorship, calls for registration of some kind, financial review. And I'm talking like down to independent media level to be able to have some kind of a license to do this. Like that's where this tends to, I see the outlines. And let's make this clear. This is not left or right. This is your government. That is absolutely, both sides already have their kind of narrative around this on why this needs to be fleshed out because of X, Y, and Z. It will only, just like we're going to get to about the digital ID and the immigration over here or voting or whatever the different, they always have two angles to the conversation. They intend to drive you in the same direction. That's where I see this coming from, even if it's just an organic story, which I find hard to believe. So it says, 2 RT employees indicted for covertly funding and directing U.S. company that published thousands of videos in furtherance of Russian interests. Now, that is debatable. When you read into this stuff, if you look at the work of people like Laura Chen or Dave Rubin or the rest of them, are we really going to pretend that they were all just ubiquitously in the interest of Russia? I mean, I flatly disagree with that. It's clearly some of it, but then the question becomes, is it the interest of Russia or was it just the truth, which then happens to help Russia because the lie was about Russia? Well, that's the same thing in their mind. The same thing we talked about with the 2016 election. Were they lying to you? Well, no. And in fact, they kind of grudgingly had to admit that. But they told you the truth was helping Russia. So you shouldn't be sharing the truth because Russia, and if you did, even if you formulated that opinion completely on your own in a cave somewhere, you were still apparently a Russian shill, a Russian stooge, a useful idiot. There's no way anybody honest and objective can agree with that. That's just the truth. So you'll see what I mean as we go through. September 4th. Now it says an indictment charging Russian nationals. Now look these names up. I did some research about the background, seeing if I could find other connections and so on. And I'll read you directly from a statement from Russia today, who is claiming them as their employees. So first thing I was wondering was whether this was just something being blamed on them, and it wasn't. But it turns out that these are their employees. So right there, it's very hard to decouple this unless the people stating on behalf of Russia today are lying, which there's a possibility in the larger discussion about what might have happened to the company. But overall, it seems pretty clear, based on them being their employees, that this was something Russia today was involved with. So the real question that becomes, was Russia making that happen? Seems very likely almost. But again, that's hard to take your own government's word at that, especially when that is in their interest. It was Konstantin Kalashnikov, known as Costa, 31 years old, Elena Afansievia. Now, weirdly enough, that exact name I found as an employee who works for the Federal Reserve, but it's clearly not her, but I found that interesting. Also known as Lena, with conspiracy to violate the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Now, it's always so impossible to take that seriously when the amount of evidence around AIPAC and plenty of other Israel government-connected assets, it's just embarrassing, and plenty of others, by the way. If it interests the U.S. government, if it's in their interest, even if it's against yours, they don't care. It's one of these running jokes about FARA that it's wildly selectively applied. It has been, as far as I can tell, forever. Now it's in a conspiracy to commit money laundering. Now it says the Justice Department has charged 2 employees of RT, Russian state-controlled media outlet, which is their claim, in a $10 million scheme to create and distribute content to U.S. audiences with hidden Russian government messaging. As far as I can tell, I don't see much that shows anything about hidden Russian government messaging, more so just that the message they were giving was not what the U.S. wanted you to hear, which also could mean false. In some cases, it probably does. But hidden messaging, I feel that's pretty deceptive. Now it says the Russian department will not tolerate attempts by an authoritarian regime to exploit our country's free exchange of ideas. Okay, let's pretend like we have this free exchange of ideas, and we do have some level of that, some semblance of free exchange, but it's clearly not as free as they want you to think it is. It's more so behind the scenes, the whole freedom of speech, not reach game. That's more important than they want you to realize. Screaming into a corner where no one can see you is not even remotely free speech. But we're still saying it out loud. But the point is that is what they're saying they're attacking. We can't allow authoritarian regimes, except Israel or anybody else, that we are okay with doing that, right? You see, that's ridiculous. You can't take them seriously when you know that they're allowing authoritarian regimes to do that to you in order to covertly further its own propaganda efforts. And our investigation into this matter remains ongoing. Says our approach to combating foreign malign influence is actor-driven, exposing the hidden hand of adversaries pulling strings of influence from behind the curtain, which again is like verbatim what the U.S. government does all around the world. They all do it. That's the thing you should remember. They all do it. They all know that. So when they tend to blow one of these things out of proportion, it's really just about making it seem as if they've caught some big unprecedented thing, but they all actually know it's probably just one of many and they all do it. That doesn't make it any less important, mind you, for whether you care about a foreign government influencing, and you should. But it says, as alleged in today's indictment, Russian state broadcaster RT and its employees, including the charged defendants, co-opted online commentators by funneling them nearly $10 million to pump pro-Russian propaganda and disinformation, which is what they call it. We'll even point to an example they list here, which is not even remotely inaccurate. It's just simply what they don't want. It's like saying any one of these discussions from Ukraine, like the train station or Bucha, or these arguments where they say that's Russia did that, even though literally everything that we can show proves the opposite, but they still go with the narrative, and we're supposed to pretend Assad gassed children and 9/11 was because of hijackers and all these lies we love to tell ourselves that we all know are lies. Though it's exactly one of those. And co-opted is an interesting phrase, because we're going to get into the point where it seems that they're all acting like they've been taken advantage of. Certainly could be. But isn't it strange that in any other circumstance, like imagine if this was me, do you think for 1 second the government would just assume I was a unwitting, manipulated person? I mean, even if that's the case, I find it really hard to believe that isn't the whole point from the Republican conversation right now that they're weaponizing this to go after Republicans just because? But yet in this case, they've got this all sewn up and they don't do that. They say, I mean, we'll get to it where they're treating Tim Pool like he was some exploited person, and we're gonna use you as a witness. Maybe that's the Republican conversation proving to be a hyperbolic lie, which is certainly possible. But that should at the very least show you this weird. The point is that the way they frame things from both sides of the paradigm, it's always hyperbolic. Every Democrat's a thief and criminal, and they're all doing this to get that. And it's always like that. In this case, the point is, if that was everything, if everything they're telling you about this was the case, this would have been immediately gone after, these people in particular, for being Russian state influencers, which, or whatever they would frame it as, which, by the way, they've already done before. So at a time when we've seen peak division and peak partisan hyperbolic, why would they not go after these people? Hey, maybe they will tomorrow. Doesn't seem to be the case, though. So to me, this seems like one other example of your government using our partisan perspectives to drive a larger narrative. As always, your government, not one side or the other, but your government using these things to drive you in a position. Obviously, that's my opinion. Think for yourself. And it says the department will not tolerate foreign efforts to illegally manipulate American public opinion by sowing discord and division, unless it's Israel. Of course, they didn't put that in there. Covert attempts to sow division and trick Americans into unwittingly consuming foreign propaganda represents attacks on our democracy. Don't you love that statement from Ray? So basically what he just said there is what we do everywhere in the world is an attack on their democracy. Oops. But of course, they don't frame it that way. But let's hear covert attempts to sow division and trick the other countries into unwittingly consuming their propaganda. Well, that's literally what their stated efforts are. Like you watch that army propaganda video. Don't they literally in bold letter tell you they're doing that? So I just want us to reflect on how silly it is. They always act up in arms and clutch their pearls about how they're doing what we do well, far worse. They do anyway. And when they say that, again, he's saying they are attacking democracy. Okay, so therefore you guys in every possible way, every day, are attacking democracy all over the world. Yes, just make sure we're objective about that because that's the truth. And it says today's actions show that as long as for, and by the way, that's not to say that means this is less important. That's just pointing out a fact. Now back to this, which is equally important. Today's actions show that as long as foreign adversaries like Russia keep engaging in hostile influence campaigns, they are going to keep running into the FBI, which is just one of these moments where they're pounding their chest like they're in any way actually doing this on a regular basis. I mean, this is just silly to me because the FBI is pretty consistently creating the very things they point at and shout about, and they're in no way historically actually, in my opinion, this is one of the most problematic things in our country. The FBI is an anti-American institution. Prove me wrong. At the end of the day, for them to stand up to me, they're just going to keep running into us. You mean like all the other times that we can't point to right now? It's silly for them to do this and go, we look at all, you get my point. They're just trying to use this as a point to make themselves look like we're always the ones stopping all this, except half the time one side or the other is calling you anti-American or calling you against them, left or right. It goes back and forth, as always, because it's so easy to see through the paradigm if you actually want to. It says, we will continue to do everything we can to expose the hidden hand of foreign adversaries like Russia, but only Russia, apparently, and disrupt their efforts to meddle in our free and open society. Yeah. As alleged, the Russian state broadcaster, RT, orchestrated a massive scheme to influence the American public by secretly planting and financing a content creation company on U.S. soil. Interestingly, kind of brings back memory of groups like Prologue. You know, when the U.S. government set up a Nazi-run media company in Ukraine and then New York and propagandized Americans with Nazi propaganda, which is exactly what began the building of the fascist state that is Ukraine and the Azov movement they created within it. Just a side note I thought was important. I'll include that article for you. It's titled Not Just Azov. The CIA has been building fascism in Ukraine since at least 1948. CIA documents make that very clear. And the point of the whole discussion is that Prologue, the company they created, was literally the Nazi war criminal they rescued. Michael Abed was his name. They put him in charge of it. So here, as they're pointing at a secret content creation company on U.S. soil, I mean, ultimately what we're talking about is a company that was, I mean, look, it very well could be exactly the same thing. But I think it's interesting to see, again, the same notes of what they have done, what they always do. And for all we know, it could be a little bit of projection. The instruments of the scheme were RT employees, the people we referenced earlier, who managed the operation from Moscow using fake personas and shell companies. And the victims of the scheme were the American people who received Russian messaging without knowing it, as the charges unsealed today demonstrate. You know, despite the fact that anybody everywhere was calling them Russian because they said these things at the time, even though they didn't know that, even though if it may be the case, pretty sure everybody was at least hearing that accusation. This office will work with our law enforcement partners to unmask and hold accountable all those who conduct malign influence campaigns in the United States, no matter how hard they try to hide their tracks. Obvious point. I'm not going to say it every time, but the reality is obvious around Israel. The idea that we're talking about an entity that is publicly, I mean, we just pointed out I just saw examples of Tinder using state ads they're putting out threatening people around the world not to resist Israel, or advertisements they put out in this country all over the place around exactly these conversations. I mean, this is aggressive influencing of your opinion by Israel, but no one cares about that. I mean, the government anyway. Now it says, while the views expressed in the videos are not uniform, which I think is very important, most are directed at the publicly stated goals of government, directed to the publicly stated goals of the government of Russia and RT. So think about how flimsy that is. So they weren't uniform opinions, and not even all, but most directed you to publicly stated goals, that is a very flimsy accusation. So all that means is if you're saying Ukraine did a bad thing over there, which we all know they did, then you're a Russian asset. To amplify domestic divisions in the United States. Now, there's an interesting claim, because I do think that's a part of what all this is. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if Russia was, in fact, very clearly trying to destabilize this country. because of the obvious benefit that would have by, slowing down what the U.S. is doing to them in Ukraine. But that wouldn't be legal or justifiable or whatever else. The point is that should matter because that's hurting you, an individual, if that was what was happening. But the idea to amplify domestic division in the United States by funding people to say things that weren't the same, but I don't know. It's an interesting claim. But I think what's important to recognize is I think it's quite obvious right now that the division, whether it's your government doing, Israel, Russia, the division amongst this population is at a peak right now. And I think that's very important to recognize. I think we all feel it. And that will be taken advantage of, whoever started it. It says after the March 22nd, 2024, this is the Ukraine discussion that they call it the terrorist attack on a music venue in Moscow. One of the employees for RT asked one of the U.S. companies, and it's all anonymized for the lawsuit for the most part. It says company one, could be any one of these groups we're talking about. And I'm going to play a clip in a second after we go over this. They asked one of the company's founders to blame Ukraine and the United States for the attack, writing, "I think we can focus on the Ukraine-U.S. angle." That's a very different thing than what they asking them to blame Ukraine. Like, you see how even on their you could just simply say that they suggested that they to ask them to blame them is different than saying, "I think we can focus on the Ukraine-U.S. angle," which there is obviously a Ukraine-U.S. angle. Now, you could argue that that's clearly in their interest, but you could also argue that it's simply the truth. That's not to say that Russia wouldn't force these people to lie if that was the case. I completely think that's obviously true. But we need to be honest and objective about what we're talking about here. It says the mainstream media spread, that's what they're saying. So think about this. In the conversation between the RT employee and the company number one, let me read it entirely. It says, "I think we can focus on the Ukraine-U.S. angle." It says the mainstream media spread fake news that ISIS claimed responsibility for the attack, yet ISIS never itself made that statement, which is true. I remember talking about that. It says all terrorists are now detained while they were heading to the border with Ukraine, which makes it even more suspicious why they would want to go to Ukraine to hide. Do you remember that story? Guys, this was a ridiculously manipulated story. So based on what they're including that as the damning part, all they're asking and pointing to are very rational points of why they might be involved. Let's not forget, ISIS, I hope you're paying attention for new people, is a proxy element of the United States and Israel. That's not up for debate. The receipts are undeniable. The only reason you may be resistant to that point is because, one, it undermines what you want to believe your government may be, and as well as the fact that it's just uncomfortable to recognize all of the lies we've been told at 9/11 and everything else around that major and important point. Ben Swan and plenty of others have done amazing work on this. I'll include James, as I usually do, James Corbett's. We did a watch along on his 3-part documentary about who created Al-Qaeda. Now, I challenge you out there. If you are shaking your head thinking this is a ridiculous conspiracy theory, how dare you? Watch one of these. Watch the first 20 minutes of any of them. And you tell me you don't want, everything is sourced in these conversations and it is undeniable. The evidence is black and white. And from shuttling them around to country, moving their families around, Israel giving them medical treatment in the Golan Heights. It's so public. Finding ISIS patches on all over the Azov movement more than once on public corporate media, and then they try to fuzz it away in the next video. It's painfully obvious that this is something that you're being lied to about. It's a proxy element. So back to the point about this. Obviously, it matters when you find out. How about the idea that they're calling Iran the state sponsor of terrorism, but then right at the peak moment with Israel, ISIS declares them an enemy and attacks them? It doesn't even make any sense. It's because they're using their elements because they're desperate right now to go after an enemy that they're dealing with. Either way, ISIS is not what it appears to be. So the story deserves to be questioned. That's not to say that this is not exactly what they're claiming, but that one point, which they use as a focal point, it's not a lie. It says between in or about October 2023 and in or about August 2024, RT sent wire transfers to the U.S. company one totaling, get this, approximately $9.7 million. Which represented nearly 90% of a U.S. company one bank deposits from all sources combined. So to me, I'm pretty sure that's and I don't want to be, you guys read through this and I'll play this video for you. It's all anonymized in the lawsuit, or rather the indictment. But I believe that's Chen, and the larger company we're talking about is Tenet. And the point being $9.7 million, and that ends up being 90% of their money. I don't care what else of the story. That is wildly suspicious. And that's one of the reasons that this clearly stands out as something manipulated. Why would RT pay them that much money? So that's obviously why first question is, was this genuinely a Russian influenced act? Certainly seems like one of the most logical possibilities. It's a lot of money to be able to dump on these people, but there could be a lot of other different intervening points. Like, let's not forget the overlap of Israel and Russia, for that matter, which is an important point that rarely gets brought up. And the idea that we could be having, let's just for the sake, because I know people are very, and rightly so, that, I mean, and I do have a focal point right now for how obviously Israel's overlapping these things. So let's just put that aside. Let's just, for sake of conversation, consider what else could be going on. So if we have this much money, clearly there's something funky going on. So is it possible that it is not a Russian entity, or these two people aren't even working for them? And we'll get into a point about somebody arguing that RT itself was sort of co-opted by the CIA, and that the people at the top of it might have already been turned because they were caught for something else. Like, this could be something bigger than it appears. And then ultimately this was done in order to drive the idea that Russia was influencing the right-wing influencers for something else. Now, obviously, what you're going to hear from the right in this conversation is something to that effect. That like this, but from their mind, it's typically all goes back to the CIA and the Democrats. Certainly one of the possibilities, but it's, hard to always, everything under the sun points back to those two things, to the people that don't want Trump and Elon Musk, the rest of them, to be seen for what they actually are. Doesn't mean it's false, though. But it's just consider that it's not as simple, especially with the U.S. government telling you that's the reality when they lie about everything, of being just the Russian did this because of that. Certainly could be, but that just doesn't make sense to me. If you want my personal opinion, there's something more to this. That's what my gut's telling me. But you cannot remove this amount of money for people that's 90%. I mean, obviously the trail shows you something suspicious. Now, it says the two employees, both in Russia, are charged with conspiracy to violate FARA, which I just laugh about because of how obviously they don't care about that. I'll include that. I think I got it in there for you. There we go. Now, here are... Oh, that's just I forgot for a second. I had it highlighted right there. Here is the indictment itself. You can read through the whole thing. Casey Wright made a good point about this. I think it's interesting, just from a general point of always screaming about free speech and not going after them claiming it's a state-backed thing, which, as far as I'm concerned, is not a provable concept. It wouldn't surprise me at all. But what they continue to point to does not prove it to me. And I've looked through it. When they first did this and they put the little label on YouTube and everything, I did not see the evidence they were claiming. Certainly very clearly possible. But they're bringing, this is simply bragging in this indictment about how they use this pressure to basically shut down RT. But it's no different than what they do with Press TV or what Israel does with most of their own media. These people are not in the interest of free speech. Neither is Elon Musk, any of this stuff. And it's painfully obvious. People blind themselves to what they don't want to see. Now, it says after Russia invaded Ukraine, which is not, even framing it like that. Yes, I would argue invade is the correct word, but obviously it's much more complex than just Russia waking up and choosing to invade Ukraine. But it says in February 2022, RT was sanctioned, which, by the way, that in and of itself seems like it makes no sense. What does one have to do with the other? Even if you think it's a state-backed entity. Like, it's as stupid as saying that because you took action in Ukraine, they're going to sanction CNN. It doesn't make any sense. But they did this just because they took advantage of it. But because they did that, it was sanctioned. It was dropped by distributors, ultimately forced to cease formal operations in the United States, Canada, the UK, and European Union. Yay, free speech. It's just silly to me. They're bragging about using these to shut down RT, essentially, in the United States, Canada, UK, and European Union. Now, you can read this for yourself. Let's get into a breakdown. I won't play all of it because it's a 30-minute video, but let's break down what Breaking Points was saying about this. Dave Rubin, Tim Pool took millions from Russian cutouts. That's how they frame it.
Disinformation influence campaign. So we'll get into that broader effort as well. Trump did a Fox News test as tight as it possibly could be. We're also going to break down fact from fiction wing media creator. What they are alleged to have done is to have funneled $10 million through a Tennessee-based content creation company called Tenet Media. Okay, we can put this story up on the screen. So your major players are these two Russian nationals. They're the ones who are indicted. This media startup called Tenet, who has a number of very highly recognizable and influential right-wing media creators on their payroll, including Dave Rubin, Benny Johnson, Tim Pool, Lauren Southern, and a couple others I was less familiar with. Matt Christensen.
Yes.
And somebody Hansen.
Yes.
Now, like I said before, just because somebody makes a bad decision in the interest of making money does not make them compromised. But at the very least shows you the unwillingness to dive into this, as they're going to criticize, and literally everybody is. The obvious reality is every one of them had every possible reason to recognize there was something suspicious here. But, you know, as Tim told you, he just bought a Cybertruck, so who cares, right? Obviously, they were interested in the revenue side of this, which, again, from somebody doing this myself, I mean, obviously, getting $100,000 a video would clearly give us more ability to do more of our work. But I still would not take that chance. I still would not, unless I could verify that this was a person with no strings attached that wanted to just dump this on us because they cared about what we did and there was no overlap whatsoever. There's no way in the world I would end up taking money from somebody, at the very least, who I did not know who they were. It's just, I mean, unless something, like, obviously, here's a good point. If this was something that was dumped in like a donation, somebody's decided to dump $100,000 through our Substack or whatever else, there's nothing we could do about that. That's not what this is. This is somebody who is directly making a contract or a deal through another company. And again, they're going to paint this for you. So I just want it to be clear. All the ones we're talking about, Johnson, Poole, Chen, Southern, Rubin, by the way, all of which already make a ton of money with what they do, decided to take money from a group that clearly is now shown to be suspect. So even if it was not to their knowledge that it was Russia, or if even that was the case, it just shows you a very clear reason why what we're doing is important today. The mainstream alternative media is not what it appears to be, even if these are just profiteers. I think that's very important to recognize.
It's like the same name as somebody from the Hanson band, I don't remember, but it's not the same guy.
Anyway,
I actually looked it up just to make sure.
The major names of Benny Johnson, Tim Pool, and Dave Rubin. I think many
those
people
are the
in our
major
audience
ones.
will know.
Yes, okay. And again, none of these individuals are accused of wrongdoing.
Correct.
However, the details here are quite extraordinary. So Tenet Media hires these influencers for extraordinary sums of money to produce some content for them. I'm talking like $100,000 a video, under the pretext that the Tenet Media people, run by Lauren Chen and her husband, what's his name? Liam Donovan. Under the pretext, which they apparently knew was a false pretext, that there was this elusive, wealthy businessman who was funding all of this. And again, we're talking like $100,000 a video plus, insane amounts of money for this, okay? So turns out that this elusive businessman is totally made up. Turns out that these two RT, like Russian agents, effectively, were influencing content. They were in the Discord.
Now, that's important to me. Now, again, I'm not going to say that I blindly can assume these are Russian agents. I don't know if that's the case. Based on the indictment, based on what we have, it seems to be the assumption is that because they are RT and because RT is state-backed, and I don't know if that's necessarily how obvious that is. Regardless, what we're being told is that these people were influencing content. So that's the most important part to me. So now you've got people like Tim Pool, like Dave Rubin, like the rest of them that are getting paid a bunch of money, which anybody would be like, that doesn't make any sense. Nobody makes that much money for one video. And then they're being influenced. And that's the point we want to show everybody. Now, maybe it's about something they were going to talk about, right? And they go, well, we want to make sure you focus on this point. Okay. Even if that right there crosses a major line for me. I don't care. To be quite candid with you, I have turned down overlapping things like that for people that just want to, even though I agreed with the general direction, because I will never allow somebody to influence what I say to you. Never. I will not, in the context of, the point is you guys can reach out to me and say, hey, I want to hear about this. I want you to cover something like that. And I'll consider it. But I will always make my decision about what we're going to discuss. And I will never let finance or money or anything like that influence the direction of what we're doing. Because to me, that it's insulting. It's breaking the trust it's breaking the agreement that we have with each other. So I think that's a monumentally important part of this. And I see them as two separate stories. Like this may develop into something much bigger where it turns out they were involved with something. But frankly, I don't even think that's the story. I just want people to recognize that the story, aside from the Russian influence aspect of it all, you just show you the mainstream alternative media and the strings attached. And maybe there's multiple strings to multiple big funder people out there and this is what David Icke is talking about. It's not genuine here. And they may not even be aware or like self-aware of how contradictory that is but it is the reality. And we need to be aware that that means people out there can dump some money in these people's hands and maybe influence what they're saying. That's never what you're going to get from The Last American Vagabond.
Telling these creators and the producers involved with these videos that were being, produced for this money, like, hey, let's focus in on this angle of maybe it was Ukraine that was behind the ISIS Moscow attack. Hey, why don't you guys post this Tucker Carlson grocery shopping video? I'll show you that in a minute, which is hilarious because.
So this is now you have to think about now you guys probably saw that video. One of these kind of casual things, and turns out it was a weird scripted concept. And this is what we need to recognize. Alex Jones, Tucker Carlson, all of this weird overlap where these things are happening, acting like we're just, it's my opinion. It's quite frankly no different than people like, who was the person? I don't know, Blinken, even though he can't play the guitar, coming out and do it. Like, I think the game is trying to get you to be like, look, they're just like me. Oh, look, he's the grocery store, even though he probably has someone paid to do that and stock everything for him. Like, at the end of the day, who knows? I'm just saying that for fun. The reality is that a lot of this stuff is about trying to cultivate a very specific impression, a very specific feeling about who these people are, and ultimately to make you trust them. To make, he's a good guy. He's just like me. He's a Christian. He believes in these things, right? He's out there fighting again. I know he wouldn't do that. Even if it's clear they broke the law or they challenge what they believe in as well, there must be some kind of a reason because I just know he wouldn't do that. We all know people like that. It's embarrassing. It is the reality of where our political spectrum has gotten to. Your president is your buddy, even though you've never met him before, and quite frankly, you don't even know who he is, and he's nothing like you think he is. But because he's presented himself that way, oh my God, it is childish. It is hero worship at a level that is wildly alarming with people that seem to be very influential.
As one of the producers was actually like, this just seems like direct shilling, and they're like, no, you should do it. And they're like, okay, fine, we'll do it. So directly shaping content and getting paid through this, shady enterprise that comes direct. This is what's in the indictment, okay? These are the allegations from the government. So let me read you a little bit of that article that we just had up. It says the indictment claims the personalities on Tenet were not aware of the backgrounds and intentions of the two Russians, and that the funding for the company came through a Canadian shell company from a frontman named, and this is the fake guy, Edward Gregorian, who did not exist.
So Canadian front company might eventually be important. Interesting, there's just in general, just to consider the points and where these things came through. So you can think about, whether that might end up being important the more information comes out.
Despite the fact that Google searches for Edward Gregorian did not return any results, two of the commentators, and it appears that those two commentators are, one of them is definitely Tim Pool, the other one's probably Benny Johnson, potentially Dave Rubin,
yes,
are the sort of focus of.
Benny Johnson's one we forgot. Guys, these are major right-wing influencers. And, just this interesting overlap. Again, it doesn't have to be about Russia in particular. It could just be that they're willing to take money from anybody, but it's concerning.
A lot of what's in this indictment. In any case, despite the fact that the Google searches didn't return any hits for this dude, the two commentators went through with the deal, the indictment alleges, after receiving a resume. Let's put A2 up on the screen that has a little bit more detail. Eventually, they did the deal. Benny Johnson, we think that could be Dave Rubin, but one of the two of them would unknowingly work for the Russians for $400,000 a month in exchange for 4 monthly videos. Guys, we work in this industry. That is an insane amount of money per video, plus a $100,000. The Russian national posted the video in the video of, they say, a well-known U.S. political commentator visiting a grocery store in Russia. We all know that's Tucker Carlson. The Russian national posted the video in the producer Discord channel. Later that day, a producer privately messaged one of the founders, Lauren Chen, on Discord and said, they want me to post this, referencing the video that the Russian national had posted. But it just feels like overt shilling.
See how funny that is? So even the influencers are like, that's a little bit too much. They did it anyway.
Lauren Chen replies that her husband thinks we should put it out there. The producer acquiesces, responding, all right, I'll put it out tomorrow. So one of the reasons this detail is important is because it shows the direct impact that these Russian nationals who were posing as not Russian nationals and who were involved in this producer Discord were exerting on the type of content that was being produced. Let's put.
One thought I just had, by the way, is, and again, I genuinely think there's very clearly something fishy here, whether it's Russia or whatever else is behind it all. But we have to recognize that just from the Russian angle of it, let's just for sake of conversation say that it was just about trying to do content in a country that aggressively tries to control content. And you're sanctioned, so you have to try to circumvent those sanctions, even if those sanctions are illegitimate. So, I mean, it's just, there's an opening there for the possibility that they were just trying to do their jobs and having to circumnavigate ridiculous sanctions, which is the same thing you could say about food going to Palestine, or Iranian everything, Syria, like that they do these, or Venezuela for that matter, and starve these people. But the sanctions, like the point is, it could be possible that the entire the way it looks all surreptitious and rather just kind of like cloak and dagger could just be because they have to circumvent these ridiculous sanctions. Now, again, the money and everything else clearly adds elements of this that make it clear that, in my opinion, that there was something more going on here. But just consider that. And a larger point about how the U.S. will sanction something and then them trying to circumvent those sanctions becomes the crime, even though they were sanctioned illegitimately, right? I mean, this happens constantly. I was going to make a point up to probably the next show about in the UK, I think there's a bus route they created. And they said they created the bus route because this, Jews feel unsafe and we have to make sure that they can have this direct bus route. And then everyone shares this thing and goes, see, look how bad it is. They have to make special bus routes for the Jews. Well, like, okay, just because they did that under the claim that anti-Semitism on the rise does not therefore prove anti-Semitism is on the rise. The actions you're taking are what you point at to the reality is it's not. Anybody being honest with themselves can see how illegitimate and dishonest this whole push is. But the point is they make the action based on the lie and then point to the action that's claiming that proves the lie. It's the same thing they do everywhere. So important to consider how that might have been an aspect.
The ISIS Ukraine piece up here as well. It's another instance where
Benny Johnson.
But Sagar, initial reactions to this extraordinary chain of alleged events, which, by the way, no one is really denying it.
No, none of them are denying it. Lauren Chen has not put out a statement, neither her husband, Liam Donovan. So again, just to recap in the indictment, Dave Rubin, Benny Johnson, and Tim Pool were not aware, according to the U.S. government, that they were being paid via Russian cutouts. But
isn't that fascinating? In what world does the U.S. government go out of its way to state, no, we know you're not guilty. We know you didn't do it. I mean, read it for yourself. I don't see any indication that how could you possibly know they didn't know that? Maybe there's something. But to me, that is one of the parts that rings the most untrue, the most suspicious to me. The part that starts to make me feel like maybe this is a larger organized manipulation to drive a certain outcome. If you think they're not capable of doing something like this, or even if you're not, let's just even put it like this. If you're not capable of, let's say, standing back and going, gee, isn't it possible that Russia's working with our government to execute some larger play? I don't think that. I'm just trying to put out something like that that's going to challenge your mindset. But you have to at least be like, that could be possible. This game we play where you have this controlled, it's the two-party illusion of your critical thinking. You're not allowed to think outside this controlled area. No, of course you are. Of course you can vote for who you want. Of course you can recognize it's all an illusion. The point is that we have to ask these larger questions. So isn't it possible that this could be some kind of organized effort to drive you in a certain position? That let's just say it's about the Great Reset that all these governments are involved with? Again, I'm not saying I think that, but just asking yourself these larger questions, because to me, I don't believe that the government would engage with this and act like none of these people could possibly be involved when the narrative is supposed to be that this is a government in particular right now that's weaponized in particular against these people in particular. And I wasn't saying that to repeat the same. Each point is in particular. I mean that. Like right now, we're supposed to be told that Poole and all these people, these right-wing influencers, are the biggest threat to the Democrat. Everything they're telling us would tell us that this would be weaponized to go after them. And that's even what they're trying to say. Look at them trying to set these people up. But they're not, though. They're explicitly going out of their way to be like, but he didn't know. It's not his fault. Does that even sound like the U.S. government? I mean, to me, that seems pretty suspicious.
Indictment makes it very clear that Lauren Chen and her husband were aware that, quote, it was the Russians in private communications.
Right.
Between the two of them, multiple other circumstantial evidence, guys, showing that they were like, when they couldn't get a response for why invoices weren't being paid, they were Googling time in Moscow as to why.
That seems so stupid. And the idea, first of all, it's not a crime to work with a company in Moscow just because the U.S. government tells you it's all based on the idea of a state influenced out the platform. But I don't know, something about that seems pretty weird to me. Like that is a very important point that makes you wonder whether they were being played, right? Maybe like the idea being this was bigger than the idea of it coming from a Russian-backed entity, and that was really the narrative that they wanted to push. And I think I made that point enough, but I think it's important to consider.
All of this was not coming in on time. I mean, at a philosophical level, it's sad, honestly, because it's very clear that the money was just so good that nobody was not asking real questions.
Yeah.
So, for example, let's put A5, please, up on the screen.
This is amazing.
This is delicious because at one point they're like, "Hey, who is the guy? I want to see something about him." And
it's a one-page graphic they apparently put out that was supposed to be summing up who Edward Gregario or whatever his name is, the guy who's funding you. And that was enough for these people, which I think that point's already been made. It's embarrassing. Clearly they didn't care.
This is literally the allegedly Wayback Machine or any of those. You'd be able to find them. And so that should have set off major alarm bells. But really what it is that because we work in this business, those
entertaining. People were raising at the time, like, the Tim Pool and whether it was Dave Rubin or Benny Johnson, like they want all this money. There's no way this is going to be economic. And the Russians come back to her like, no, we're good with it.
Right.
It's like, okay.
I guess they were just like,
what are we doing here?
I mean,
and the other funny thing about the fake resume, so whether Benny Johnson or Dave,
I think there was one more point that I was going to play. That was basically the gist of it.
to them. And so even if it's the posting of that one video isn't economic, they're engaged in a broader ideological project that they believe is going to pay off for them over time.
What she's describing there is the idea that these people that might be influencing them, whether it's Russia or whatever's behind it, oftentimes aren't necessarily in it for the immediate return, whether financial or otherwise. It's about the long-term payoff for influencing. And that's my larger opinion about how these governments operate, right? This is a propaganda effort. Everything we're talking about, all the mainstream alternative media, it's about dumping, even just to saturate the field so it's impossible to get the truth. All these things matter. It's an important point to think about.
Operations, Iranian perhaps influence operations with the DOJ. In fact, I have it on good authority that there are several so-called war YouTubers who are out there who are directly on the payroll of the Ukrainian government and or cutouts of the U.S. intelligence community.
Right. So I'm going to leave it there. I think that was the point I was going to get to. Is the bottom line is that this is insulting to pretend like they care about this in any context. Honestly, any context, let alone when, I mean, the point is clearly that there are other examples of this, whether it's Israel or Ukraine or just themselves literally creating cutouts that they pretend are independent media. It's all over the field. It's everywhere. So if that alone should be one of the morals of the story, that recognize that there are people out there that have literally been, they've spent the entities like the CIA or whatever we're talking about, intelligence entities that have unlimited funding and long-term operations to cultivate things and train. And, now today with algorithmic, machine learning with artificial intelligence and learning about what you like they can cultivate a persona that perfectly fits what they think you're going to like. Not maybe you personally, or maybe actually you personally. I don't know. But at the end of the day, we need to be objective enough to ask whether the person you're staring at, including myself, by the way, anybody, might just be not what they appear to be. That's called questioning everything while considering all possibilities. Hear what the people are saying, consider what they're putting out there, and then ask the other questions too. Just because it aligns with what you might be thinking honestly, when these days, when it's perfectly aligned with the way you view the world, maybe this should start being suspicious to you. At the very least, stand back and ask these questions. Where are they getting, you get the point. I think this is an important conversation, and I'm glad this is really coming out. But there's more. So here's Russia in general responding. This is from Al Jazeera from the 5th. Russia warns response to the U.S. sanctions will make everyone shudder. I always hate these kind of things because it's almost always kind of taken out of context. The point is they're simply saying that our response is going to be, make you shudder, maybe bad, whatever the way you want to read that is. But it says Russia said that it will take retaliatory measures, which might just be sanctions for all we know. Russia's actions against the state broadcaster, it says, was an information campaign ahead of the U.S. presidential election. I'm pretty sure I had this highlighted, but I think the point was simply they're accused of funneling $10 million. It's an obvious operation information campaign that's long prepared. It looks like I didn't save the screenshot, but either way, the bottom line is that this is Russia essentially pushing back and saying that this was not a, operation. This was not, and that they're censoring RT but the point is that they were employees of RT, right? So that's important. So at the very least, they're acknowledging that these are RT employees. I think their main point is this was just simply our media, and that you're making this about the state-backed entity. It wasn't, and so you're censoring content, or whatever. But the bottom line is, I think it's important to recognize that they were employees and not some other pretend thing that the U.S. government was doing. Now, Andrew Wiseman from MSNBC points something interesting out, his opinion. He goes, Russian disinformation campaign has explicit goal of helping Trump win and Harris lose. So you see, everybody wants to take from this what works for their political narrative. I mean, what sense does it make in any way for Russia to influence media in multifaceted ways based on what they're framing it? Not all the same opinions, in some cases to help Trump win. I mean, I get the narrative they always want to spin is that Trump was influenced by Russia and Putin, which, by the way, was pretty obviously not the case in the context that they were framing it as. I think all of these entities have overlapping points, but it was Israel. That's not because of the other points. It's because of, at the time, Mueller's investigation identified, unbelievably obviously, Israel influencing all of these people, and they moved it aside. That's why many of us were saying it's Israelgate, not Russiagate. It's right there. And so the point of this, making this about Trump being influenced by Russia when they're all being openly, overtly influenced by Israel, kind of seems like an intentional deviation from the major point. And now we're stepping in, like right before the election conversation, all of a sudden this spins back up. I mean, so this, again, take a step back. That's why I was just saying that. And ask yourself whether possibly all of this was one large thing done by your government in order to get you in the position perfectly set up for the next two-party delusion election. Now we got Kamala saying Trump's being influenced by Russia. He's saying I'm still piecing together what they're going to, of course, she's communism and socialism and they're going to take it over. But it's weird though, because this is exactly like the last conversation. And I think what they ultimately want is to get you away from seeing the real picture. If that's what this ultimately is, so consider that. I think a lot of people within the two-party illusion are not willing to ask whether that's possible, whether it's not the Democrats after the Republicans, but rather your government manufacturing things within that paradigm to get you in a specific position. But it says, targeting swing states and specific voter groups, including Hispanics and Jews, in particular media platforms. Interesting. The new DOJ charging documents raise a curious question, he says. DOJ charges two lower-level employees of the Russia Front Company, right? Those people they mentioned. But despite proving chapter and verse about the complicity of the two founders of that company, again, whether or not government, they're arguing that the people at the top of the company, which I find that also hard to believe. Obviously, they would know about $9 million, almost 10, right? So it says that, but despite that, the founders of RT aren't charged. I agree. That doesn't seem to line up. Or the fact that they wouldn't go after the people that in other contexts they were calling Russian disinformation agents. Weren't they just saying that about Poole and the rest of them? Yes. But now they're going to go, don't worry. We know you were innocent. We won't even come after you. In fact, we're going to use you as a witness. Don't even worry about it, which is what we're hearing right now. And again, in the lawsuit or the indictment itself, it basically states that they know they weren't. How does that even remotely line up with the bigger narrative we're being spun about Democrats versus Republicans? It does not make sense. He says, my suspicions, the founders were charged a while ago under seal and flipped, as in they were caught and they flipped them to be basically assets for the U.S. government, but maintain their position at RT secretly. And he says they're cooperating with the U.S. government. Now, that's his opinion, and he states that. It's not provable. It's certainly possible, and that would actually make a lot of sense. But my wonder is about whether this is about Russia at all. Like, let's just take that at face value. Like, this, again, is about trying to convince the U.S. audience of that. So if this, I mean, this is interesting. This is MSNBC co-host of a podcast for MSNBC. You could have just made it clear that, look, see, we knew it. These right-wingers are being influenced by Russia. But instead, he takes it a step further and says it may very well be that they already went after these people and they flipped. And so that would make it the U.S. government going after right-wingers. Now, that perfectly works for the Republicans who want to make it about the only Democrat side of the government going after right-wingers. But then why wouldn't they just do that in the first place? Like, the idea that they would need to go out, like, the point is all you would needed to do was make this about them being influenced by Russia. But I guess it seems wildly abstract. Again, it could be what they're framing it as, but I think to me, it represents a bigger picture of your government trying to manipulate us right before the election in interest of getting you in a position to focus only on the internal dynamic of the division that's rooted in a lie. Right back to the lie of Russiagate itself. Like, we're literally rehashing a Russiagate narrative again. I find that to be interesting. But it's certainly possible that this is a CIA type of action through a cutout to go after people in this country. And just because that aligns with what the Republican narrative is doesn't have to mean it's false. I just wouldn't see it as the Democrats going after Republicans. I would see it as your government going after entities. But the question would be why they would go after people that I think are a useful tool for what they're doing. So if that's the question, the answer might be that they're using this to make these people look like they're the suppressed heroes, right? I mean, isn't that what the idea is around Trump and a lot of this stuff? Like, I genuinely think that in a lot of these cases, that they're setting this up to make it look like they're the heroes being suppressed by their government when they're already going, don't worry about it. You're not going to be able to. But it's still being framed that way. But again, there's more tomorrow, next day, maybe it could change. But as it stands now, honestly, that's what makes the most sense to me. Robert Barnes chimes in and says, wonder why the DOJ didn't indict the company? That's what they were just asking, as opposed to the individuals. Because Mueller's scam Russiagate indictment got exposed as BS. Of course, he's not talking about the Israelgate part of it, because the company appeared in the case, demanded discovery, and DOJ had to drop the entire indictment. Odds the funding source is closer to Langley than Moscow? That's certainly possible, right? But again, obvious point comes to mind for me. If all of these efforts was to hide the source, isn't it possible that the source is the entity that seems to be the source in every other conversation? As Pauly points out, nah, Tel Aviv. Consider both. Don't dismiss one or the other based on your current standing. Consider both. Or, independently, but also consider both as one idea. That Tel Aviv and the CIA were doing this to go after you, Americans. Either way, I think it's important to see that everyone seems to be understanding this, at least, the feeling that this is not as simple as bad guy Russia trying to influence American opinion, which again, as I've said 100 times, it's very likely. But to me, I think you see where this is going. September 4th, this is Wired. Right-wing influencer network Tenet Media allegedly spread Russian disinformation. Now, the Tennessee-based company, and again, it highlights people like, that's Tenet Media, people like Benny Johnson, Tim Pool. I think this is mostly redundant. Johnson, Pool, Rubin, Southern did not comment. None are accused of wrongdoing. Really important to reiterate that. We are disturbed by the allegations in today's indictment, Johnson wrote on X, referring to himself and his lawyers, which make clear that myself and other influencers were victims in this alleged scheme. Hardly victims, guys. Everyone is seeing, if you look through this for yourself, this was at the very least willful ignorance. So for them to come out and all of them kind of taking the same line that we were taken advantage of, well, you were hardly taken advantage of when you made a hell of a lot of money to do content that they sort of guided you on. That does not seem like being taken advantage of. Sure works for you now. Poole also released a statement saying in that should these government allegations prove true, really, I, as well as the other personalities and commentators, were deceived and are victims. Victims. And then Rubin retweeted that. That seems a far stretch for me. Now, AG points out, just so to clarify, because I think it's important to note, the indictment alleges the founders of the company, Lauren Chen, and her husband, intentionally deceived the influencers mentioned below. So very clear, not even just says that they weren't guilty, but the idea that they go out of their way to make the point to say that they were deceived. But in what way? Is this falsely portraying to the commentator that he was sponsored by private investors, Edward Gregorian. But again, we just went over this. It was insultingly flimsy. So this was willful ignorance. If you poke at it and it almost falls over and you go, never mind, not going to look anymore. I'll take it at face value. That's Edward. Does that sound like a victim to you? So far to the U.S. government's indictment that would go out of their way to say no, that they were deceived? I don't know, man. That does not seem like the U.S. government is not in the habit of just giving you the benefit of the doubt, unless it's in their interest. Think about that. Bradley says the indictment notes the influencers agreed to the deal even after they got the weird web CV of the funder. Due diligence was clearly not their priority. Everybody can see that. And then Tim Pool says, I have been contacted by the FBI as a potential victim of a crime. Really? This seems very off to me. The FBI believes I have information relevant to an ongoing criminal investigation. Now, to be clear, he could have framed it as this, and that's maybe they're going after him as a suspect. So, objective. We'll wait and see how this plays out. But to me, this builds right now as a very, very suspicious, victim dynamic that no other context would they be framed as victims. And I mean, again, going back to the narrative of the right versus the left, that doesn't make any sense. Are we being told the FBI's weapon? I mean, none of these narratives make sense when you really look at it, because the point is it's a government, not two sides of it. It says, I will be offering my assistance on the matter. Of course, all the same, it doesn't matter. So Ben Shapiro chimes in and says, this is correct. And this is the point about them being victims. Of course, Ben Shapiro steps in with all the other Zionist, anti-Palestinian and says, this is correct. Dave and Tim Cast and Ben and Johnson aren't the issue here. They were apparently deceived by the company founders who allegedly taking cash. Oh, because Ben, because you read the indictment like the rest of us, that in no way shows they were deceived, that they chose to ignore the obvious holes. They're circling the wagons, right? Because let's make sure we ask questions about other overlapping points. But Secular Talk says, and by the way, I don't support either of these people for the most part. He goes, this is effing BS, Ben. I work in the industry. Independent media isn't independent. But again, he makes an excellent point. Independent media isn't independent if they say yes like a little lapdog to every Tom, Dick, and Harry advertiser wanting to throw money at them. I've never had a conversation with an advertiser and you jam an effing ad read into every 7-minute video like a corrupt sellout. You are, which I completely agree with. If somebody is giving hundreds of thousands of dollars a month or week, there are strings attached. You know this and you're lying. Now, I just find Kyle to be very partisan as well. But either way, his opinion here is, I completely agree with that. Everybody would. I mean, objectively, it obviously seems suspicious and they just chose not to look. You don't get to act like a victim with that. And why the government would frame the narrative for you like that should be the most suspicious thing about all of this. Now, Sebastian Gorka, who was apparently contacted for this but didn't take it on, says, always follow the money. He says in February 2023, Lauren Chen approached him to be the face of Tenet Media. So clearly aimed at Republican influence, obviously. It says the money looked great, but I wanted to know where it was coming from. Simple question, you would think, right? So whatever your thoughts about him, he clearly was like, I'm not going to just blindly take money. So that's a good, that's a good aspect of trait for him. The rest of them, make a note of that. After pushing repeatedly, she gave me names of people who had no internet footprint, like Edward Gregorian. See? So whatever your thoughts, he clearly cared about being influenced by somebody he didn't know, which anybody honest would. Or who had zero media connections. I mean, none. He said it just didn't add up. Warning, if you have a brand and somebody wants to leverage it, find out who they are. It's that simple. FYI, says according to yesterday's DOJ indictment, Edward Gregorian doesn't even exist and was invented by RT and the Kremlin. Now, that's the way he's saying that based on the narrative coming from our government. I don't know. I don't think even remotely can prove that. I think it's about the idea that it's RT that they claim is state-backed, and the rest is filled in the blanks. But it says those caught up in Chen's web should have known better. Seriously, unless due diligence wasn't important to them. There is your ringing point right there. It's not. Same thing we hear about all of these people, whether it's InfoWars or the rest, why people left, why Dave Knight and the rest, because they don't have, they will go with whatever works. I know that's not fun to hear for people that you want to look up to, but the reality is there. The track record is there. I think it was, who was it here? I think I've got this right here. Let's see. Yep. T's pointing this out.
I am going to share a community story from our friend Richard Grove when he was at the InfoWars studio behind the scenes because of his documentary that he just filmed making State of Mind. And the commentary that he gave, observing that studio firsthand, was that they don't check their facts. They basically just run with it, and they do it way too fast. It's the same reason that, like, David Knight left the organization because he's like, yo, back off
and the fucking Truth Stream kids.
Yeah. So that's the thing. It's like, it's a nonstop thing. He's been like this for so fucking long. It's maddening. It's just ridiculous.
For a number of reasons, but
Yeah, but, you know,
playing
after
fast
the
and loose with
recent
what
bullshit
was going on was one of the reasons Bermas gave for leaving InfoWars back in the day too.
Right? I mean, that should matter, guys. Now, again, don't blindly take our word for it. Look. And if you disagree, then good. Then you came to your own conclusions. But at the end of the day, the evidence is pretty clear over the years. And, you know, just because you lob out a bunch of hypothetical, like, you know, I mean, there's one that I just saw floating around about what was, you know, something that was going to happen. There's a school shooting, you know, we predicted on the 9th. It'll happen the 5th, but it's close enough. Well, it's not close enough. That's wrong. It's not the case. You can float a lot of hypotheticals. There's going to be an event. There's going to be a false flag. Something will fill the gap. What I'm more interested in is how many times over the years any number of these people have been flagrantly wrong in very dangerous ways. You know, like, it's just sugar water. Don't worry. Doesn't that matter more to you than guessing abstractly at something that kind of fills in the blank later? I think the track record of people needs to be consistent. Like the point that I point out about TLAV, and it's not just me, it's the entire group that we have at this platform. Our track record doesn't need to be screamed about. It's obvious. You go back and look at the major discussions that we've had, whether we're piecing together what we think will happen that literally turns out to be the case just because we were watching the story, or that we show you something based on what we've done our research on that is the case and is later proven right. Our track record is obviously there. And yes, I'm patting myself on the back, but more so demonstrating our value to you to understand why it's important to look. Wait, maybe if you don't like us, find somebody else that is in the similar path, willing to be on that path and not a partisan path, no matter what. But it says, P.S. I don't trust the Harris-Biden DOJ as far as I can spit them after what they did to innocent January 6thers, which I agree. But again, I see it as a government thing. Because I mean, obviously, I'll point some articles out in a second. I think the January 6th thing was it was about your government weaponizing a whole lot of things overlapping with Israel and Ukraine. But it wasn't about Democrats fighting Republicans. It just wasn't. It's about your government using those things to get you in a very clear position. But he says, and just basically what they're doing to Trump and everybody else. He says, time will tell what Chen knew and what she and when she knew it. Interesting. This person responds by saying, does that suggest that Laura Chen, who seems to be deeply embedded into conservative right-wing politisphere, could be totally compromised? The point they're just making there is, like, we just need to consider, right, that it's not a left-right thing, but in the current dynamic, it's obvious to me, in my opinion anyway, that the right is the direction that they're giving you for the next election. And so I think it's important to see how this is all being laid out. Now, from the partisan side of this, after what we just went over, here's what Kanoa the Great says. The DOJ charged 2 Russians with funding Laura Chen's tenant media, claiming they gave $10 million to influence U.S. politics. Chen has spent the last few months criticizing Trump for going weak on crime, immigration, abortion. She's called Vance a total blunder, contributing to a total lack of enthusiasm. If one trusts the DOJ, which I don't know why you would, despite its history of political bias, the Biden family, of course, in his mind, that means for the left against the right, which is simply not the truth. The Biden family received over $25 million from Russia, the spy chief of China, and Ukraine without registering under FARA. 100% agree. But by the way, you could make the same points about all sorts of things. What about Miriam Adelson giving Trump $100 million for his campaign? I mean, guys, there's a lot of obvious overlaps that we don't want to look at. Or Ukraine, for that matter, in 1,000 different ways that overlap with Trump or overlap with other people in our government that are left and right. But the point is not to say this versus that. The point is that there are all sorts of examples. Biden and his family are shockingly corrupt. Hunter, it's obvious. And that's the point to make here, is that this is being selectively applied. Now, you could read that, and maybe you're right, to be about blindness to one party versus the other. But if you look back through history, it's just not the case. We're watching a partisan game played by a government that loves for you to think that there's 2 parts as opposed to a government. Again, my opinion. But I think if through that opinion, what it shows me is an interest in trying to get you to fall into this and to think that because they're doing this, it's about trying to do this to Republicans. Therefore, the Republicans are the good guys. That seems to be the simple backbone to just everything happening right now. And it's childishly simple. They said this, so the opposite must be true. I can't believe we're still falling for that. But it says it would seem like Russia is backing Kamala Harris. Okay. So now the left is saying Trump and his Republicans are being funded and influenced by Russia. Now the right is trying to throw it back at them, which is pretty much what always happens. Actually, it's Russia funding Kamala. See? How about they're probably all throwing money at each other, and it's not even really, you get the same old point. But they show all these clips about her saying things against Trump and so on. I wouldn't even argue that I think Shannon or the rest of them are necessarily, I think that it's ultimately about painting a picture that works for the overall agenda, not necessarily that these people were all knowingly involved in one thing or another. But that's just my opinion. Wall Street says, when they say they were Russians funding the anti-Donald Trump content, I guarantee you somewhere you'll follow the money and find it's really the CIA working with the Democrats. Yeah, maybe so. But my point is that that's what is the narrative to them, whether or not the facts ever back that up, as you well know, just like the left does, the same damn thing. Wyatt Reed adds another point to this. Now here is an interesting overlap. So you got the Israeli propaganda, I don't even know what you would call it. Machine is probably too complimentary at this point. I don't even know what's worse than that, but this clunky thing that's falling apart everywhere. Their propaganda machine is embarrassingly bad right now. But the point is that this is part of that propaganda Hasbara. This is one of the people who are constantly screaming about things around that conversation. He says, one by one, each of these Russian propagandists will fall. God bless the FBI and the Justice Department. And look, he points out, the ones you just saw, and Tucker and the rest of it, but he also goes Jimmy Dore, Jason Hinkle, Brand, Ray McGovern, Max Blumenthal. Okay, so clearly this is about people that are highlighting Israel, because a lot of that is all intermixed. If you're focusing on the Russia conversation, that's a mixed bag. What's funny to me is right now, from Israel's perspective, it's in the I think what this ends up showing me is that there's the likelihood that this is about Israel trying to destabilize this country using all of its possible tools. I mean, it seems to line up, and obviously would be in the interest of Israel, but question it for yourself. I just think it's very obvious to me on a world stage scale what entity right now is in the most desperate position and is in the most interest of making sure that the most, I keep telling you, everything they're doing is aimed at the Western audience, particularly the American audience. How does that make sense? It only adds up when you recognize that the most important thing for Israel is to make sure that the Western audience believes the narrative. Because the United States government, who is pushing that, are a central asset for why the Israel still exists. Their own population doesn't agree with what they're telling us. So the bottom line is that this whole thing is aimed at you. So when we see stuff like this, we need to ask, is this all about destabilizing our internal dynamic? And all they get to do is point at Russia, which is what they always do. Wyatt Reed said, very sorry to disappoint Australia's best fed fascist, but reporting facts I don't want to hear is not currently a criminal offense in the United States. Now, that's his opinion, obviously, but I agree for the larger part. What they're talking about is a lot of information that you can easily prove is true. This falls against the narrative, whether it's, anti-Ukrainian or anti-Russia, Israel, whatever it is. Yashir Ali points out, Blaze Media has now fired Lauren Chen. So now you got the Republican platforms getting rid of her, which makes sense, obviously, because she's sort of toxic at this point based on the way that all went down. But it just kind of shows you that they're, from the Republican side of this, boxing away the person that was part of that problem. Which, if this was about the manipulation, I don't see why. Well, I guess the idea is that she in particular, they're claiming she was aware of it all. But again, I think all of them were aware of it. So it's selective, I guess. But it says yesterday after the indictment, they alleged that her and her husband were behind this. The indictment also alleged they participated in a conspiracy to cover up the original source of the funds. Now they have fired her. Now Anonymous highlights this interesting point from The Guardian, which is just hilarious and just fun to look at Tim Pool without his beanie on. But the point here is that they actually, it just makes you think about how bad this is. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it's intentional. The Guardian used this guy's picture and claimed it was Tim Pool. Are they really this bad at their job? The Guardian with resources, and you're literally going to put up a picture. I just think that's embarrassing as hell, and it shows you how silly this all is. Maybe it's intentional, though. But this is the Guardian putting up a fake picture, or a picture of some other guy. I guess it's Greg Hausch. And he Anonymous tags them and says, hey, Greg Hausch looks nothing like, and he calls it the Russian asset Tim Pool. What's weird, Anonymous seems to have had this crazy left swing recently, or for a while, maybe always. I don't know. It's very strange. Greg is a nice guy. We respect Greg. Change the picture. Picture below is Tim Pool without his beanie. Please use that. It's just funny. It's so embarrassing. I don't know why you can do that. But anyway, Pretty weird. They just used the wrong picture, and it's just fun to point out the Guardian's ridiculous. Now, on top of that, this is from the 5th. Former 2016 Trump campaign advisor is charged over working for sanctioned Russian TV. So to me, this just feels like a very, very clear effort to make this all about the right and Russian influence, which, again, just like before, seems very flimsy based on the idea that we know RT is state backed, therefore that means this. And it's all these, it doesn't seem, even from a court of law perspective, like this would even hold up, which is just like last time, right? So I think this feels very clumsy, which makes me wonder whether it's even about going after the Republicans, more so about making you think that. That's why they're like, don't worry, guys. We know you're not guilty. The U.S. government has charged Russian-born U.S. citizen and former advisor to Trump's 2016 campaign with working for a sanctioned Russian state platform. Right? So the point is, it's only a criminal act because they claim that entity is no longer allowed to be worked with. But I mean, it just seems like, look, I go on a radio show all the time with Sputnik and whatever else. I'll tell you right now, if RT reached out and wanted me to go on a radio show to talk about it, pretty much anybody else as well, I would. So I gave my opinions and I don't hold back, and it's not influenced by anybody. But did that make me a criminal? Maybe in the eyes of the U.S. government. Well, that's the whole concept we're talking about. Now, don't forget things like this about the left and the right game. So Bob Mendez, if you don't remember, was just recently charged as acting as a foreign agent for Egypt, taking money illegally from a foreign government. But they didn't get a lot of attention because it wasn't one of the ones that they love to politicize. It's funny how that works out, right? But the point is simply to show you, and for all we know, this was simply a extension from some other government using Egypt. I'm sure you can imagine. But all it is to point out that this is not new. And frankly, I think every single one of them are profiteering to the max because they're all criminals and they all know that. So it's like an allowable level of criminality. So my point when this comes to this kind of conversation about other government entities and the influence therein, I think that's just like saying it's Tuesday and how it's being used. And it's the same point that I was just making. On that note, by the way, there's other indictments and things flying around about Trump, and everything loves to be politicized under the lens of political persecution, which frankly, I think that's almost always part of it. But that doesn't mean the claims are also false. So I just want to highlight, as that's happened to him, interestingly this is from today, FBI raids the home of 2 top deputies for New York City Mayor Adams, according to other sources. So that's a left-leaning concept. The point is, it doesn't have to mean one or the other. The point is just to show you that there's a lot of overlapping things happening. And we just, as the partisanship, tend to frame it whatever works for the partisan game. And if you come in with any kind of objective perspective and they call you some kind of a shill for the other side, it's very simple. We all see it. It's frustrating. But here's another angle to this. Now, this is a WikiLeaks document, Vault 7. Remember this? CIA hacking tools revealed. And to be clear, like I just said, what I outlined is what I genuinely think is the reality. But always consider this. Now, this maybe it's not even related to what's happening. But just remember how it was revealed that your government has the ability to hack as well as all sorts of other things and leave the footprint of whoever they ultimately want. Well, it's not, most so are the people they've already stolen things from, but Russia being one of them. Here's from WikiLeaks Vault 7. It says the CIA Remote Device Branch's Umbrage Group collects and maintains a substantial library of attack techniques stolen from malware produced in other states, including Russia. With Umbrage and related projects, the CIA can not only increase its total number of attack types, but also misdirect attribution by leaving behind the fingerprints of the groups that the attack techniques were stolen from. So just consider that as we go forward in this new technocratic age, and the reality being that ultimately, if they wanted to, they could do all sorts of stuff like this, more so hacking, and just say it was Russia. And anybody would go along with that, including the partisanship. Now, I'll include this as well, and the idea that the whole January 6th overlap. Remember what this ultimately was. An effort, in my opinion, to frame the Republicans as being part of some kind of white supremacist, vanilla ISIS rising entity, but also overlapping that with the Azov movement, Israel, and the funding in Ukraine. And it wasn't about, in my opinion, a partisan divide. It was about using that for the interest of their agenda. But again, I see it happening right now. Using the Republicans to convince other conservatives that we need to have digital ID under the guise of the SAVE Act for voting and all these other things. By the way, on that note, again, tomorrow I'll be interviewing Catherine right here in the studio. Catherine Austin Fitz. I don't believe it'll be live, but I'm going to try to get it out tomorrow either way. But the point is, we're going to talk about that exact conversation. We're looking the whole thing, everything we've been talking about. alliance included. But so January 6th, the failed false flag meant to blame Russia and you using the CIA growing Azov battalion. So the U.S. government, Israel, Azov movement in Ukraine, because remember, that's the point here, as you can see, this Ukrainian Azov movement member, all proven, Sergei Binyan, as this is the other article, January 6th was always a very clear government operation, is on the record, on video, screaming, let's go, in Russian. He speaks Ukrainian. He's Ukrainian. And as a member of the Azov movement, next to Chancellery, along with Antifa members screaming, we did it, we tricked them. The point was this was an organized intelligence and operation meant to, in my opinion, completely frame them as the entity being used through this kind of mechanism of white supremacy and Nazis and all of this, which kind of blew up in their face because now it's clear it's Azov movement and even Israel at this point overlapping with fascist entities. But it's interesting and obvious how they were trying to accomplish this. And I see the same hallmarks with all the things we're talking about. And now Russia seems to be coming right back up again. Which doesn't mean you should ignore possible Russian influence. But the obvious point is that it's far too clumsy. Now, this is something that, again, interestingly overlaps, which might even add to the point of whether Russia could be part of something. But this is a random account as Q since 2017. It says, oh no, Libros, what to do? It says a vote for Kamal is a vote for Putin. Putin says Ukraine's incursion failed. Excuse me, backs Harris in the United States election, citing her infectious laugh. Okay, so I said Putin regularly trolls the two-party illusion and Americans' naive obsession with it, recognizing how easy it is to manipulate American opinion with a well-placed statement. Now recognize that your chosen ideologue does the exact same thing to you. And Casey White has another example where he says in an interview, Joe Biden says for all his allies to support Harris, so I guess that's what we'll do. He's making a joke. But of course, it doesn't matter because the idea is they're going to frame it as, see, he's working with Harris, which is already part of the narrative from the right. And the other side's going to say this point, right? And say, like, the idea is clearly, all right, that's not the other side of it. But the point is that the idea he's using here is to play on the way these narratives are used, this flimsy game that's played. But it also seems like he's adding to it. So consider for yourself, but let's make it clear if you're going to believe that because he jokingly said this, that therefore Harris is the one, or vice versa, that means Trump, you're just playing into the lie. You're playing into the easily broken down manipulation. Now, on the note of interfering, the White House says Putin should stop interfering after backing Harris. Oh, look at that. Oh, look at that. Apparently he's backing Harris now. Guys, that's not a joke. This is actually Radio Free Europe, or specifically Reuters, and it's the United States government saying this. And if you watch the clip, he's laughing. He's joking. And are you really going to say that? I mean, look, just so it's clear again, which I don't think I need to reiterate, but he literally says, Joe Biden says that all of his allies have to, so I guess we have to. Like, do you really think that, are we that simple? But your own government is now pointing to these kind of conversations and saying, he's backing Harris. And people are going with that. Does that not show you how simple this all is? That it's not even really about, they all know, we kind of know that's not what he meant, but it doesn't matter because it's about the division. And on top of that, stop interfering. that's what you're going to go with. So we're right back in the Russiagate nonsense where they know we see through it. They know it's not real, but it works for their purpose. The government, not the left or the right. But as Carlos points out, breaking, the U.S. government takes a short break from interfering in the Venezuelan election to accuse Russia of interfering in the U.S. election. Perfect. Or how about every other election everywhere? We're going to talk about all the constant different dynamics we're seeing where they're doing everything they can to get the people they want in power and like everything everywhere across the world. Yeah, it's not even that much of a hyperbolic statement. But Putin makes a joke about Harris and, oh my God, we're going to stop. It is kind of embarrassing. Like, I'm embarrassed by these people. Empire of Lies says, can someone tell these idiots that AIPAC just spent $100 million interfering in the U.S. election? Right? Exactly. No, it doesn't matter, though, because, Israel's our ally. This person says, the Foreign Agents Registration Act has been weaponized to arrest 3 Russian and Chinese citizens just 1 week alone. This is the one from that RT discussion. And that's the other one. This is someone from China. It says, meanwhile, Israel gets to run our government and with money and supply and supreme impunity. Now, you could argue that all those entities could be part of the same thing. but you can't miss how clearly that they're ignoring one and going after the other. Now, on a larger point, I genuinely believe Israel has almost a stated interest of trying to destabilize this country, whether it's for their the prophetic kind of direction of destabilizing these entities to bring on the end times, what the rabbis are currently talking about all over the country, or just to destabilize this country because they need you as Americans to stop seeing what they really are. In any case, a great clip from James Lee around the USS Liberty conversation. It's only a couple minutes. As he said, he expected to find the evidence because we all actually know the reality of this, because there are people like this guy here who are still alive who will tell you they know Israel tried to kill them and that their government covered it up very clearly. These are veterans, by the way, both Republican and left and right. There are some existing on both sides. But he goes, but I did not expect was to find evidence of CIA conspiring with Mossad to sink the ship. Now, this clip was important in and of itself. Now, watch the full video there as well. But it's about the thing he says in the beginning. They wanted to bring us into World War III. Well, you know what? I think they still do. And I think that's part of what's happening right now.
It's out there to die. That's what our government wanted. That's what Israel wanted. They wanted to bring us into World War III.
On June 8th, 1967, the USS Liberty, a U.S. Navy research vessel, a spy ship, was stationed in international waters off the coast of the Sinai Peninsula when, without warning, the ship came under attack by fighter jets and torpedo boats, resulting in the death of 34 American servicemen and leaving another 171 critically wounded. But the most shocking detail? The attack was launched by America's closest ally in the region, Israel. This is a story you've probably never heard of before. And if you have heard of the USS Liberty, the story you've been told is probably not what really happened. The Six-Day War of 1967 forever reshaped the Middle East, solidifying Israel's position as a dominant military power in the region. But the lead up to this conflict was marked by intense geopolitical maneuvering and escalating tensions, including the threat of the Soviet Union joining the conflict on the side of the Arab nations. During this period, US foreign policy was also shifting. President Kennedy had maintained a balanced approach in the Middle East, supporting Israel while trying to remain neutral. But after his assassination, President Lyndon Johnson took a much stronger stance in favor of Israel. In a now famous quote, Johnson told an Israeli diplomat, quote, "You have lost a very great friend, but you have found an even better one." And on the eve of the Six-Day War, the United States sent one of its most advanced Navy research vessels, the USS Liberty, commanded by Captain William McGonigal, to international waters off the coast of the Sinai Peninsula. Officially, its mission was intelligence gathering. But some aboard the ship allege there was a far more sinister plan at play.
James, we were deliberately sent there. All the ships were going one way. We were the only ones going that way. We were sent there by the Johnson administration in collusion with the Israeli government to sink that ship and blame it on the Arab states.
Think about how important that is right now. Look at everything else that's happening. Right? There's a very important reality about false flags and psychological operations that goes back a long way. And this is what they have been doing to you for a long time. Your government, Israel, it's the reality. I mean, we could talk about Pearl Harbor is the same conversation. We've talked about this many times, sending the ships out, the reality. I mean, I have a personal overlap. My late great-great-grandfather, great-great-great, I forget exactly, was there. He used to tell us the story every time I went to see him. And his point was that he was convinced that they sent them out there to avoid, basically that they let their friends die. They woke them up on the weekend that it was. They sent them all out. They stood there and they just stood out in the open, right, sitting in the water, rather on the ship, sitting out there, and then came back and it was over. And he was convinced, because he's right, that they did that to move those ships out of the way and let this happen. Same thing he's talking about here. This is not new. Your government has always been willing to sacrifice you for their interests, even if it's the interest of another government.
On May 30th, 1967, just 10 days before Israel's attack on the USS Liberty, General Mir Admit, the head of Mossad, the Israeli equivalent of the CIA, flew to Washington, D.C. for a series of secret meetings. The first person he went to see was James Angleton, then the CIA's head of counterintelligence. He then went to meet with CIA boss Richard Helms, and then finally a meeting with Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense.
Now make sure you check it out. He's doing good work. The bottom line, guys, is this is important to recognize in the bigger picture of what your government's capable of. And you could ask whether it's just in their interest or whether they're being influenced, bribed, threatened. I don't know. It's up for you to decide. But the reality is, obviously, this is something to consider with all of these conversations. Now, let's talk about the rising independent media and the manipulation we're seeing online and how, again, keeping this all their stuff in mind. A very clear weaponized influence. Well, you can think it's Russia if that makes more sense to you. Frankly, it should matter just as much no matter where it comes from. But entities, and again, whether that's in collaboration with your own government, the CIA, entities influencing content, backing creators. We've always known this was there. And asking yourself whether that might be more pronounced and bigger and more influential than you recognize in order to get very certain things done, potentially even just one thing for the interest of another government. I'm not saying I even think that. I'm just saying that is possibly what we're dealing with here. It could be as simple as that. It could be more abstract, but what we want is, hopefully people can take away from this is the undeniable reality that that is happening. And we need to see there's people that are, just like I keep saying, like a technocratic Pied Piper, walking you into the control structure. So Elon Musk shares this. It's a little meme, says, it's like a little breakdown, of course, being aimed against the other side, saying, someone has done a thing. Then the next box down says, are they on our side? And then it splits in two directions. On one side, it says yes. Then the next box says, okay, then it's fine. The other side says, are they on our side? It says no. The next one says, bastards. It's meant to be a joke, right? But also kind of an indictment of the Democrats. He doesn't say that in here, but obviously that's how it's being taken. And of course, the reality is what Tiberius says. What's funniest of all is that both Democrats and Republicans will share this meme, criticizing each other while both being absolutely correct. I love Tiberius. He really does see it, in my opinion. How similar both camps act is ludicrous to those who see it, and preposterous to consider so many don't. And he uses that great Spider-Man meme. But the point is that Elon's sharing this because he's trying to, put himself above it all. Like, look at how dumb everybody else. You're literally you're cultivating an entire community where that seems to be the guiding principle. Twitter files and all the rest of this stuff. It's a running joke. And again, it's not even about whether some of the information was, as we've already shown you before he did that, accurate. The reality was training you to blindly go along with narratives constructed based on the person's clout alone. Right? Well, we can trust him, therefore we don't need this. You always need source material. You always need to verify information because they could just be wrong, right? Or lying. In this case, everything we're looking at, left and right, it's the same thing. Right? Oh, who is it? Who's saying it? Oh, okay, they're on our side, then who cares? Don't say that about Trump because that'll hurt him and we want Kamala to lose. So we shouldn't tell the truth, right? Don't highlight what Kamala just did because that'll only give Trump the win. Obviously, the truth is more important than those kind of dynamics. Always. Despite whatever they want to tell you as being an adult today. We're supposed to just vote for the lesser of evils because that's what grown-ups do. No, that's what blind followers do. That's what people who have given up do. That's what black-pilled actually looks like. Elon says, well, first Mario Nawfal says, always rising these people up who are just mindless repeaters of the propaganda. Trump considers Elon for role in auditing U.S. agencies. Are we serious? It says Trump is reportedly eyeing a plan to involve prominent business executives, including Elon, in auditing federal agencies to identify programs to cut. Elon has already shown interest in taking on the role, according to Washington Post. And he responds, I can't wait. There's a lot of waste and needless regulation in government that needs to go. I agree. But are we really going to pretend that Elon is the one that fills that role? Like this persona they've created about him being some studious businessman? I mean, come on, guys. It's not even remotely. Look at what he said and done in the past. Look at the failures of things he put forward. He's got a lot of money and influence, and he loves to frame himself as some kind of technological It's just not apparently the reality. If you take away the billions of dollars in influence, I don't think he's as spectacularly unique as we love to pretend he is. Either way, obviously I have a different opinion than some people on where this is all going. So you can claim that's what's flavoring that opinion. I frankly just think it's the reality. But do we really pretend that he's going to be the one to like identify where things are failing or where they're using too much? I mean, frankly, even his business sense over the years does not even remotely line up with that. Or the bottom line is there's 100,000 people out there that would probably be much better at the job. But of course, if it was a black woman, the lesbian, as opposed to the best person in the job, we would all scream woke policies. But if you choose a South African oligarchy technocratic billionaire who also is equally unfit for the job, we won't call that out because otherwise, you see my point? It's always what flavor we like to criticize. He's not the best person for that job, so we should care about that. But of course, I'm anti whatever you want to frame it as, so go ahead. The bottom line is, these people hated each other before 30 seconds ago, just like everybody else. Or at least that's what they were saying as it suited their interest in the moment. I'll get to that in a second. All the many different, everybody that's lined up right now have videos of calling each other how bad they are. You're this or you're that or you're stupid or I don't trust you. So they're either lying then or they're lying now or both, if that even possibly makes sense. Here he is saying a Trump victory is essential to the defense of freedom of speech, which you're not doing, secure borders, which none of you seem to care about other than digital IDs, safe cities, and sensible spending. Of course, sensible spending, right? Because they're all so good at that, aren't they? All the massive, unrealistic debt we were put in during the pandemic, shutdowns, which we didn't need, that Trump was responsible for, and the emergencies and the Defense Production Act, which they blame on anybody else, or everything else before that, or Trump declaring bankruptcy, how many times he did, but still made sensible spending, because we like to say that. Or Musk, same point. Safe cities? In what way are we talking about? Because they love to be like, look at those bad Democrat cities, which I'll point it out too. Horrible. But there's also a lot of Republican cities, which are also pretty bad. And just because we want to highlight certain aspects of certain things to pretend like that makes the other good, that's a lesser of two evils right there. Well, sure, I'll be the first to point out that some of the worst locations I can see are going to be Democrat cities. But I can show you a lot of Republican locations that are not even remotely positive. But I guess because it's lesser bad, that seems to be what we go for. I want the lesser bad cities. How about that? Anyway, my point is highlighting the fact that these are not remotely what these people actually are. But Mario says, new polls show Trump is leading in key battleground states because we all like polls when they say what we think, even though they're usually not true. But here's what he points out. A weird chalk drawing, I guess, of him quoting the same thing he just said. A Trump victory is essential. Defense of freedom of speech. But that's not what Trump wants. That's not what any of them fight for. I'll show you in a second. But that's the narratives we like to repeat. Mensch Osint points out, freedom of speech, we can't even make jokes on cyclists on this site. Imagine the level of censorship toward political tweets. And he's right. They censored a tweet of him making fun of this cyclist. I mean, I think we even talked about this. But it's everywhere. It's not even around Israel alone. They'll censor hate speech. They'll censor all sorts of stuff. And guess what? Almost 90% of the time, they've already complied with government edicts to censor. And I think what somebody was just pointing out, despite their focal point on Brazil and others, they've already completely acquiesced with plenty of countries' demands. Why don't we care about that? Politics. Because it works for the narrative. And by the way, in his own lawsuit, it states very clearly that they've already met or exceeded basically all of what Garm's demands were. So then what was the whole thing about? To make it look like Garm was dissolved, when in reality, as Mike Benz pointed out, the structure, despite dissolving the umbrella, was completely functional. Well, guess what? Weird. We don't talk about that, huh? Because they were partnered with Garm the month before they did all that. They repartner, yeah. But, who cares about all the facts? Let's get back to the partisan discussion, Ryan. Well, here's Elon Musk citing Doge designer saying, Elon spent $44 billion to revive free speech worldwide. Like, it's just so pathetic. Like, at least say that he spent this to try to fight for free speech. To continue to ignore the fact that they'll tell you freedom of speech but not reach. And here's RFK Jr. coming out and tweeting that is explicitly not free speech. He just said that like 3-4 days ago. And calls out Twitter and for suppressing content. He just said that online. Who cares, though? Because he's saving free speech because we like to say that out loud. While censoring things around Israel or working with the IDL or, all the things that 30 seconds ago most Republicans would have called out, but not because Elon with his sink. It's all good now. But he says, your support's greatly appreciated. But let's not forget, by the way, the guy saving free speech has 60 different suppressive flags on TLAV's account alone. But I guess we all put that to bed because we don't want to talk about it anymore, right? APAC Tracker is one of the ones that showed me this, but this was circulating. It was a very big, for about a day and a half, like less than a day. it got shown that using Grok, you're able to highlight the different tags that were placed on people in the platform. And then weirdly, after it became sort of viral, they shut down Grok, put it back up, and couldn't do it anymore. What do you know? What a coincidence. Nobody had more tags than me. But, Jake Shields and InfoWars, they can all call themselves the most censored man in America. Pretty sure that we fit that bill these days. And I used to reflexively kind of not say, I don't see anybody who is dealing with the level that we are. Now, I'm not talking about financial things with what they're doing. I'm talking about the amount of platforms, the amount of near constant acts and things like this. More tags than anybody on Twitter. That's just simply the static reality. That's not free speech if you are suppressing our content like you provably are right now. Don't forget this stuff, guys, because these things get put to bed. Here's Elon Musk citing RFK Jr., who says, Kamala Harris, and you saw this going around, says Musk has lost his privileges. Like, ask yourself why in the world you would say something like that. Now, yes, of course, she could just be, just to be clear, for those maybe new, she is a monster. Just as bad as Trump, as far as I'm concerned. They're both actively doing the same problematic things from different flavors, different angles. But my point is, let's not make it pretend that I think she's somehow better. She is horrible. My point is she's even worse than Trump on paper because I think the reality is to drive you in that direction. I've said it many times. I hope I'm wrong. I hope Trump saves the world. But the reality is you must be aware, even if she thinks this, which is ridiculous and stupid and naive or ignorant to the Constitution understanding, her political advisors know that. Her political advisors know that half the conversation, if not the country, recognizes free speech. The First Amendment is not a privilege. It's an inherent right as literally stated by the Constitution. You guys know they know that, right? Even if they want to convince you otherwise, they know that. If they handpick the way her hair flows and the kind of shirt she wears, they're sure as hell going to make sure they know what she's saying and how, just like Trump. So when they come out and she says Musk has lost his privileges to free speech, does that not feel a little bit staged in order to go, wow, okay, who's actually fighting for free speech? Oh my God, it's Elon Musk and Trump. Oh my God, how perfect that lines up. I could be wrong, but I just find it to be a little bit cartoonishly obvious right now. And he says, can someone please explain to her that freedom of speech is a right, not a privilege? Now, in RFK's defense, he did, I think right around the same time, or like a few days after, tweet about how Twitter was not doing that. In fact, here, let's just bring it up since I've said it more than once. I can always do this and remind you guys how to search specifically on here. I just end up searching anything, and you go from the search bar, go to search, advanced search, type in the words. Oops, what was it again? It's freedom of speech or reach. There you go. So any words you want to type in right there, and then go to the accounts, type in the account, and it should pop up. Unless they censored it, suppressed it. Oh, there it is right there. Freedom of speech, and this is on August 31st, so the day after, so I was right. The freedom of speech without freedom of reach is not freedom of speech. That's a big deal. And he also says otherwhere, like in the same day about Rumble and Twitter not suppressing content. It seems out of line with what they're all doing. I think it's very crazy, especially if Elon is now seemingly part of the administration. Decentered News highlights, then why did you praise Twitter as being the bastion of free speech? And here's Elon literally saying freedom of speech, not reach. That's very interesting, right? Is he lying there or is he lying there, right? That's the whole point we're going to get to in a second. But why this is so interesting to me, save that for you, is obviously, as he's highlighting here, that this is the point. And I think this is about trying to push this idea that she is the one fighting it. But you over here are making the same point about what they're all working with. And all of them are leaning into Twitter being the savior of free speech. So it's like they're creating this false dichotomy where no option within it is giving you free speech. Hey, what do you know? It's the lesser of evils in a free speech play. Telling you guys, if you think it's an adult thing to do to settle for the lesser of evils, you are the most lost person in this conversation. I'm not saying that gives you another pot. Like, if you can't recognize that maybe we're in a position where they've set this up so it's designed to fail or get what they want, maybe we need to take a couple failures to get the thing back on track. That's not giving up. That's recognizing the harsh reality they put you in and fighting for the possible while giving other solutions and acknowledging if you want to vote, go ahead if you think it's going to make a difference. The bottom line is people telling you, what else are we going to do? She's worse, so go to him. That is giving up. That's accepting the broken reality and operating within it. That is what you get it. I mean, again, it's sad that anybody pretends that's logic. He goes on to say there has to be a responsibility, or she says there has to be a responsibility placed on these social media sites to understand their power. Now, the statement's not necessarily inaccurate, but that in no way should mean that they should be suppressed for what they can say, that people should be censored. The point is, there is a point to be made about the power that someone like Elon Musk clearly can wield through this platform. Now, I'm not even saying that means X, Y, and Z. We just have to acknowledge that there's an issue with this and how, but I argue that that probably is by design to drive us into a place where we rationalize some kind of control over the platform while simultaneously framing Elon and the Republican side of this as the forlorn heroes fighting against the censorship. It seems far too easy. While you can then prove within it that he's actually not even fighting for free speech. Like that right there should prove that to you. But it says if they don't police content to conform to government-approved narratives, they will be shut down. That's the translation. I was gonna say, the point is, there has to be responsibility. Now, who decides that? Not the government, right? The bottom line should be these platforms should be acknowledged for, in a real objectively free speech field where it's not being, the point is that people, I would argue, would begin to call these things out. I mean, frankly, it's already happening. But my point is, if you removed all the censorship, including Elon Musk and Twitter censorship, then there might be a possibility for some kind of a real conversation. But that's not happening. And same with the government side of this and driving different actions. He says this is what she actually believes, which I guess you could assume that, but it's always funny. He says free speech is the bedrock of democracy. So you don't believe in democracy then, or you don't believe in free speech? And the Democratic Party wants to destroy it. It's just so childish. Now you as people respect anything about you or want you to be free or want you to have free speech. They're all using this dichotomy to keep you in position, to keep you in the effing hamster wheel. But they're the baddies and they want to destroy everything, but we're trying to save it all despite everything that challenges everything everywhere. But, let's just go along with the fun narrative. I'm sure you could tell it's so embarrassingly obvious. But again, I think people start to see it. Here's Torah Judaism making a point about this. It says, we don't know if our channel is deliberately being shadow banned, but there is a shadow ban on Twitter. Many of our followers can't even access our posts. We have received such complaints. I wonder, what is our crime and why is there a shadow ban? Nobody's going to answer that. They don't care because it's happening to people specifically around the Israel conversation. I think we all know why. Zionism, Authentics, CHEQ, these are all explicitly Israel-influenced things that are taking place almost solely on Twitter right now. Now, Elon Musk has the same graphic he put out, but here's what Sally Agris said. Again, the statement says, Trump victory is essential to defense of freedom of speech, secure borders, safe cities, and sensible spending. He says he literally spent $8.4 trillion. That's talking about his last administration, and wants to deport people for criticizing Israel. I love Sal. Because again, same thing. He sees through the lie about our current voting dynamic. He sees through the lie of the two-party illusion. We're going to connect again. I already reached out to him before as we get closer to the actual fake voting dynamic. But I mean, it's just embarrassing to pretend. I get the narrative around it. The Republicans will jump in and say this and spending. The same Republicans, mind you, that will criticize everything about the pandemic illusion, but then defend his spending during the pandemic illusion. Because it totally makes sense, right? It's sad. And I know people can sense that. So call others out, whether they're Republicans or not, for playing these games. Sean McGuire says, Elon is one of the best in the world at synthesizing complex information and seeing a path forward. God. It's just it's infuriating. Yeah, because they're the best at everything all the time. And Trump and everybody, they're so good, and they're so smart, and they're so great. Or not. Or they're really flawed, terrible people, and we just love to make this case because it works for our partisanship. But it's just so gross. This this lionizing of people that are not what they are pretending they are. He's not always right, as none of us are, but he has an incredible track record of seeing non-obvious things years ahead of others. I don't agree with that at all. I mean, he's got some cases where he's done things that I think are, groundbreaking or good or innovative. But I don't agree with that framing at all. Now, this is somebody complaining, saying the other side. Elon's lost his mind. He's gone completely insane, MAGA cult. He's completely lost it. I don't agree with that either. I frankly just think he's playing a role. I think he is playing a perfect role of the Pied Piper of the Republicans into this control structure. That's what I think. But here's Elon responds to Sean saying he's the best of everything all the time. I have never been materially active in politics before, but this time I think civilization as we know it is on the line. Whenever you hear these kind of like ridiculous, cartoonish, hyperbolic statements, ask why. This is the equivalent of, this is the most important election of our lifetime. That's what he's saying. He's got countless tweets over the last so many weeks of basically the same sentiment. If not Trump, we're all going to die. If we don't have Trump, we're going to get communism. If we let Kamala win, we're all going to lose our freedoms. Constantly. He says, if we want to preserve freedom and a meritocracy in America, because that's what we all agree we have, right? Then Trump must win. You know what's funny about it is when they want to, from the Republican side of the illusion, it's all about how the Democrats have destroyed this country and we don't have what we should and they're ruining everything. But then when they want it to be good, they're where the meritocracy and the freedom and we have all the things. Okay, well, then isn't that equally Democrats that are doing, it's just so lazy. But, if you apply logic to these things, it's easy to see. But same tweet, Defiant L says, people might not like him, but he's the only choice we have, or they have, telling you, only choice you have. I simply said blackpilled. And it says, what's the alternative? Same old thing. So if all you're saying is that you don't have any other choice, then you just admit it. I've given up. I have given up. I am being pressured to choose what I don't want, and I'm pretending like that's what we all should do because that's what grown-ups do. You've just given up. If you've either been convinced that you don't have a choice and then don't frame that as doing the right thing, or you have chosen to give up and go along with the flow. We're over here showing you other solutions that seem difficult, but not this. It's still another path. You are the one going, that's the only thing. Now, yes, some of the people on the side of this are saying Trump is the most amazing thing ever, but most of the conversation is, yeah, we get it. They're all bad, but he's less. I just don't know why in the world we pretend like that's anything but giving up. Sal the Agorist says, and this is not to be taken as we should do nothing. It's just funny. He says, or the meme says, for 50 years I've voted, and for 50 years things have gotten worse. But I have a really good feeling about this election. It's just, the old, if you do the same thing and expect a different result, the point is not to do nothing, but to find a different path. The same old thing is going to give you the same old thing. Now, here is where the contradictions come in, and I think this is very important. I think this one section here will be a good thing to clip out. Now, this is not an attack on Trump or the Republicans, as I've tried to make clear. I think Kamala Harris is a joke, like far more than Donald Trump. I think Kamala Harris and everything they're doing is absurd. You've taken one of the least popular people in this entire conversation and just on a dime said, she's the greatest. And we're all supposed to pretend like your own followers know that's stupid. And some of them go along with it because they hate Trump or because they don't want to look bad, but they all somewhere in their minds know that doesn't make any sense. Yay, Kamala. My point in saying all that is that I think it's self-evident that she is the least likely of all of this. So why it's not like the game they play in the corporate media, even they don't even do that anymore, is where it's one story here, one story there. That's balance. It's not something as fake balance. That's the truth, period. And we could be wrong about that sometimes, the facts. But the reality is that, in my opinion, it's self-evident that she is ridiculous and that everyone sees that. So why would we continue to go look at that just to make it a balance? No, the point, in my opinion, is I think Donald Trump is the one being shoved down your throat right now, even to the Democrats, which a lot of them are now going, I see it, Trump's the one. Okay. When all of these people, I think it's obvious this is about my point being that your vote doesn't translate. We don't live in the place we think we do. We should be fighting for that. A vote in a representative system is paramount. I just don't think we have that right now. And all that's to say is that this is the next person being shoved in front of you as the one that we're grudgingly supposed to accept. So my point is, I want you to see who this person is and what they're really trying to do. And even if Kamala gets put there, all the same things are going to happen. That has to matter to you. So here, focusing on the Trump overall, RFK, Elon Musk, Thiel, and everything else, Vance, here are some things that I think you should care about if you care about the facts. If you care about who these people really are, not just the narratives being spun to make it appear that one's worse or better than the other. So here is Elon Musk, or rather Donald Trump, calling Elon Musk a BS artist. Saying he's not going to buy Twitter. Well, I told you, he's a BS artist. He's not real. And then here's Elon Musk saying Donald Trump is too old and shouldn't be in power because anybody else would be better. Well, yeah, that's weird, isn't it? A couple of years later, they're acting like they're going to save the world. So you're telling me that in 2 years, suddenly they change their opinions of each other? It's certainly possible. Not for every one of them, though. Not for every single one of them. Trump, Elon, Vance, RFK. Every one of them thought the other was a POS until suddenly they're all going to save the world together. Well, you know what? I hope you're right, but I think there's obvious reason to be a little skeptical here.
Another one of our highest priorities under a Republican Congress will be to stop left-wing censorship and to restore free speech in America. And go out, by the way, while I'm here and sign up now for Truth Social. It's hot as a pistol, and you see that. I pulled that one right. Leon's, I tell you what.
See, I love this, by the way. He does this all the time. And I try to point this out, and people act like I'm crazy. So he makes mistakes like that. He said Leon, he meant Elon. But if this isn't important, this is just a fun passing point where he does this in his talking points sometimes and people read into it. Maybe, but his point, he just made a mistake but he brushes it off and he acts like he meant to say it. Leon, I'll tell you what, Elon meant this. I just think that's important to think about. So a lot of times this happens where he kind of just fudges his way through things.
See that? I pulled that one right. Leon's, I tell you what. Elon is not going to buy Twitter.
But he did, though.
Where did you hear that before? From me. From me.
Hashtag Trump's always right.
Fake account. She says fake. A lot of them. Nah, he's got himself a mess. You know, he said the other day, oh, I've never voted for a Republican. I said, I didn't know that. He told me he voted for me. So he's another bullshit artist, but he's not going to be buying it.
Look at that.
He's not going to be buying it. Although he might later. Who the hell knows what's going to happen? He's
You gotta love that. He said he won't buy it 5 times in a row, and then maybe though. Hey, and then later Trump was right. He knew he'd buy it. He give you what you want. Here's both sides of the story. You pick which one I said. How's that work?
got a pretty rotten contract. I looked at his contract. Not a good contract.
Interesting. I mean, these are small points, by the way, at least that one. Just the point is, he said he was a BS artist. He said he wouldn't do that. Here's what he responds. Elon Musk, 2022, says, I don't hate the man, but it's time for Trump to hang up his hat and sail into the sunset. That's interesting. He says, Dems should also call off the attack. Don't make it so that Trump only his way to survive is to regain the presidency. Adam says, I'm a little surprised this is your take. I say Trump, DeSantis 2024, DeSantis 2028, 32. This is the time before they suddenly hated each other, right? It says Trump would be 82 at the end of term, which is too old to be chief executive of anything, let alone the United States. If DeSantis runs against Biden in 2024, then DeSantis will easily win. He doesn't even need a campaign. Now, just the point is that they could just be saying what they want you to hear, but then it should make you really question what maybe they're doing that now. Maybe they hate each other, lying to you now. Maybe they lied then. But the point is, these people are grifters. They're just telling you what works for them to make money, to succeed, to influence. Here they are telling you that they don't really like each other, right? Here is RFK Jr. Great clip from Decentralized News. 30 seconds before he changed to Donald Trump's the worst person possible. He'll do this and he'll do this. He'll ruin that. But now I'm going to work with him because he'll do all the right things.
Presidential debate left no doubt that neither President Trump nor President Biden is prepared to unify our nation. In fact, their rhetoric and their actions will only divide us further. I've made the heart-wrenching decision to suspend my campaign and to support President Trump. If an establishment Democrat wins, or if Donald Trump wins, the cold civil war is only going to intensify. We're going to get more of the same, more division, more poverty, more debt, and all of these crises will only accelerate. Don't you want a president who's going to get us out of the wars and who's going to rebuild the middle class in this country? He put a Goldman guy in charge of the Treasury Department, an Exxon CEO in charge of State Department, a pharma president in charge of HHS, a Verizon lobbyist in charge of the FCC. Don't you want the regulatory agencies to be free from corporate corruption? And that's what President Trump told me that he wanted. Coal and oil lobbyists to run EPA and the Department of Interior, respectively, a big ag robber baron as the head of the Department of Agriculture, and the neocon militarist John Bolton as National Security Advisor. He also told me that he wanted to end the grip of the neocons on U.S. foreign policy. I'm not a fan of President Trump. I want to beat him in a campaign on a level playing field. I want to talk about his issues, about locking down the economy, shutting down 3.3 million businesses, about running up a $34 trillion debt, about engaging us in forever wars and doing favors for Wall Street. Don't you want a president who's going to get us out of the wars and who's going to rebuild the middle class in this country? His pick as vice president is a salute to the CIA and to the intelligence community and to the military-industrial complex. Their gravy train is going to continue.
Are you going to actively campaign for President Trump?
Yes, I will. I'm going to work to get him elected. He reauthorized FISA and the Patriot Act. President Trump shut down 3.3 million businesses. President Trump said that he was going to run America like a business. And he came in and he gave the keys to all of our businesses to a 50-year bureaucrat who'd never been elected to anything and had no accountability. He closed down 3.3 million businesses with no due process, no just compensation, in violation of the Fifth Amendment. With the lockdowns, the mask mandates, the travel restrictions, President Trump presided over the greatest restriction on individual liberties this country has ever known.
How do we ignore something like that? Do you think RFK Jr. just changed his mind? I mean, it's just shocking to hear stuff like that because it's the reality. Now, I'm sure whatever narrative you want to insert to somehow makes rational explanations about why he would have done it, even though it destroyed, he was convinced. Like one of the ones I just keep hearing is not his fault. He was told that by the advisors he brought on. It's like, okay, fine. You could argue that he was misled, but it's still his responsibility. This game of removing them as responsible, even though they're one, that means he's not a leader, guys. A leader is the one responsible. You take responsibility for the choices that you allow, and even if you were misled, it's still your responsibility. But I mean, I can go along with the idea that maybe he didn't intentionally do it, but that's not what people are saying. Right. And frankly, I don't think that's true at all. I think it's obvious where we are, especially now that he's still to this very day tells you that injection is good and saving lives.
Don't you want a president who's going to protect America's freedoms? And who is going to protect us against totalitarianism? He didn't stand up for the Constitution when it really mattered. He broke his promise to declassify the JFK assassination files. President Trump also assaulted the First Amendment, failed to defend press freedom when he continued President Obama's persecution and prosecution of Julian Assange. The Trump White House also went after the Fourth Amendment prohibitions against warrantless searches and seizures with this intrusive track and trace surveillance systems that obliterated our rights to privacy in this country. Don't you want a president who's going to protect America's freedoms and who is going to protect us against totalitarianism? President Trump's beloved Operation Warp Speed shut down jury trials for any corporation that was involved in COVID countermeasures. Here's what the Seventh Amendment says. No American shall be denied the right of a trial before a jury of his peers in cases or controversies exceeding $25. There is no pandemic exception. And the waiver of the Seventh Amendment for corporations that were involved in countermeasures meant that no matter how reckless the corporation behaved, no matter how negligent it was, no matter how toxic or unnecessary the ingredients, no matter how shoddy the testing, no matter how grievous your injury, you could not sue that company.
Can you imagine? They knew that, by the way. Can you imagine what happened during that time frame? Like they already get passes and find ways around it, but these big corporations, I mean, there was a years period potentially, for all we know, still going, but arguably through that time period where they just didn't, like you said, ingredients and safety. There was a free-for-all. It's pretty much always a free-for-all in this country, but there's a free-for-all more than ever during that time frame. I made that point during the time. These kind of things have to matter. You can't just be like this idea that this was somehow made sense. You can't do that based on some hypothetical we now know was a lie. We now know they knew it was a lie. And internally was that they knew within the administration. But of course, they always give a pass because he was manipulated by Fauci, even though he gave Fauci a medal. But, we'll just forget all the facts.
They had a ticket to make anything they want without any kind of accountability. And don't you want a president that's going to make America healthy again? President Trump has told me that he wants this to be his legacy. I'm choosing to believe that this time he will follow through.
It's quite a big hope. Well, here's J.D. Vance, right? When he 30 seconds ago said that he hated Trump. Funny how this is all working out.
For Trump, I'm never a Trump guy. I never liked him. It makes you think that at a fundamental level, this is sort of a he said, she said, right? And at the end of the day, do you believe Donald Trump, who always tells the truth? Just kidding. Or do you believe that woman on that tape?
I cannot stand Trump because I think he's a fraud. Well, I think he's a total fraud.
I mean, how do you go from that to supporting him like he's going to save the world? You don't, is the point. You just don't. This is a manipulation. And J.D. Vance was put here by Thiel for obvious reasons that we'll get to.
That is exploiting these people, who is a total fraud.
Like you said, I agree with you on Trump because I don't think that he's the person. I don't think he actually cares about folks.
So as a conservative who thinks that Trump does not have the answers and isn't qualified to be president, what are you going to do this election, if you don't mind saying?
My current plan is to vote either third party or, as I joke to my wife, I might write in my dog because that's about as good as it seems. But, I think there's a chance if I feel like Trump has a really good chance of winning that I might have to hold my nose and vote for Hillary Clinton. Ultimately, I think I'll probably vote third party. I might vote for this new guy who I really like, Evan McMullin.
Think about that, voting for Hillary Clinton over. I mean, and it's just not some kind of a political point. Like objectively, she's probably one of the worst people on the planet with all the overlapping things we've talked about. And we're going to talk about, you're going to hold your nose and vote. That's as stupid as Bernie Sanders or Tulsi Gabbard spending the entire election telling you how bad she was and then voting for her or endorsing her. That's politics for you, and it's disgusting.
I actually met the other day, but I think that I'm going to vote for. I'm going to vote third party because I can't stomach Trump. I think that he's noxious and is leading the white working class to a very dark place.
Hey, look at that. Now, what's interesting on a side note, here's Michael Rappaport. I just think is the ridiculous, clownish person who is basically, look at his Twitter account. He's an anti-Trump guy, hating on total orange man bad kind of person, right? But not anymore because Israel, which pretty much needs to show you what's guiding this. He basically, now he's sort of going after Kamala, right? And we've already made points in the past about Trump and in Israel. I just think it's embarrassing. Somebody like this who spent all this time about how bad this person is now he goes, I always like my presidential candidate on headphones and not answering questions. That's definitely what he's trying to make a joke. He's a terrible comedian about how she's wearing headphones and not answering questions. But my point is, you can look at his other conversations recently, and it's leaning towards Trump because Trump is Israel. In the conversation anyway, she's also wildly pro-Israel, but the choice is supposed to be Trump. I think that's obvious. And even his own his own followers kind of pushed back on this. He's like, oh, sorry, I wasn't where I was supposed to not attack her. It just shows you how ridiculous this all is. Everybody in these positions are being driven. Now here is Vigilant Fox going, here's Trump saying Hillary's lucky he didn't put her in jail. Oh, yeah, is that the case? Lucky? The idea that you clearly did not even intend to do that and clearly are all pretty much on the same side, whether it's the Epstein overlaps, the fact that you, like these people are on the same side. I know that's not fun for Trump supporters to think about, but it's simply the reality. And I'll make this case for you right now. The point is, he is beginning up the same thing he did before the last election. Lock her up, and the Fed, JFK documents, none of which actually happened. But he knows what you're thinking. He knows what you want to hear. And now you're going to get a 2.0 version of that. Clinton's always still on the table, so let's go and throw it back out. She's lucky. Maybe I'll do it again. Maybe I'll get her this time. And peppered with whatever else you're going to hear about the border, about whatever new wedge issues he's going to tap into you talking about Bitcoin. That's what's happening. Here's what he said.
Leader again, you will have unprecedented power. Just on your own personal psychology, what does that power do to you? Is there any threat of it corrupting how you see the world?
No, I don't think so. Look, I've been there for 4 years. I could have done a big number on Hillary Clinton. I thought it looked terrible to take the president's wife and put her in prison. She's so lucky. I didn't do anything. She's so lucky. Hillary is a lucky woman.
Does he sound drunk or something to you? Like, am I crazy? He sounds like he's slurring or talking very slow. Maybe they slowed down the video. And that's not like an attack on him. I just think he sounds different than usual.
Because I had a lot of people pushing me to. They wanted to see something, but I could have done something very bad. I thought it looked so bad. Think of it. You have the president of the United States, and you also had Secretary of State, right? She was. But you're going to put the president's wife in prison? And yet when I got out there, they have all these hoaxes. They're all hoaxes. But they have all these dishonest hoaxes, just like they did in the past with Russia. That was a hoax. The 51 different, agencies or agents, that was a hoax. The whole thing was a hoax. There was
rather a misdirection away from the obvious Israel influence that actually came out in the investigation.
So many hoaxes and scams. But I didn't want to put her in jail. And I didn't. And I explained it to people. They say, lock her up, lock her up.
No, that's what you said, man. You started that.
It doesn't. We won. I said, we don't want to put her in jail. We want to bring the country together. I want to bring the country together.
Isn't it funny how that works when you want it to, right? Like the idea of, like someone just made this joke about it now. Like it's just a flip-flopping of concepts. The moment it works for you to not do the thing you promised, we just go, no, shut up. It's about unity. We're trying to be better. It's okay. Well, if you had said that first, or maybe I had said that when he said lock her up, you would have called me a lefty. You see, it's just flimsy. And by the way, that works on both sides. It's the same old dynamic.
You don't bring the country together by putting her in jail. But then when I got out, they went to work on me. It's amazing. And they suffer from massive Trump derangement syndrome.
They all do. Everybody in the paradigm, left and right, Trump derangement syndrome.
TDS.
Or delusion, whichever way you want to put it.
And I don't know if it's curable from their standpoint.
So here are some other points where you can just make sure you see that right away. It wasn't after some kind of immediate, like longer dynamic. Right away, 2016, mind you, Trump has praised Hillary Clinton as a great woman and great president. Here's the other one where he says at the 2017 dinner that he's, I'll play them for you. This is not some after 4 years afterthought or whatever else. The bottom line is it was clear that this was never on the table. If you actually understand, if you've read Whitney's research around the idea, if you understand the overlapping dynamics, it's clear that they are not adversarial.
Well, I think her history is far from being over. I'd like to answer that question in another 15 years from now. I think she's going to go down at a minimum as a great senator. I think she is a great wife to a president. And I think Bill Clinton was a great president. You look at the country then.
You get the point. Here's the other one.
There is something that I wanted to say, because I was very honored, very, very honored, when I heard that President Bill Clinton and Secretary Hillary Clinton was coming today. And I think it's appropriate to
this is after running your campaign on lock her up.
say, and I'd like you to stand up.
At the inauguration, right? So you literally go into this process. Now, look, you could take him at face value. Oh, I want to bring the country together. Well, I don't think any of them actually want that. And clearly their actions in no way did that. You don't go on calling the Democrats the most evil entity, fighting against them the entire time, framing them as the adversarial point to your entire administration, but act like it's all about bringing them together. Of course, the one side of it will argue that was their fault and that's what they did. But it's always like that. They're both doing it. You don't step into your inauguration after that. The point is, it was never on the table, guys. I think we must be honest with ourselves and recognize that. Here. Oh, so the point there before I go past it is the idea that clearly you have to acknowledge that doesn't line up. So now we should be going into this next step and ask ourselves, maybe they're lying to us now. I know, it's shocking, right? But the point is that they're using these kind of lies and divisions to drive you into very clear positions. One of the ones we've been really trying to call out because it's the most obvious to see is the Digital ID Act or Digital ID aspect, and using the SAVE Act and other dynamics to convince you that this is necessary. In fact, just like with the COVID-19 conversation, what did I say? Donald Trump being in that position, which I think was the plan, which WikiLeaks showed us, with Clinton's emails, making sure he was on the final stage. You can argue it's because they thought they would win, but I don't think that's the case. It's obvious, in my opinion. The bottom line is that him being there pacified what would have been the most resistant aspect during all of that, the constitutional gun owners, right? The Republicans that would have been the most resistant to anything about suppression of free speech, suppression of your rights. You can't go outside, have to take this shot. Nobody, but of course, because Trump was there. Well, sugar water or whatever else, whatever narrative got you to think that it was all okay. Now, the same thing is happening. We're at another inflection point here where it seems the most important to convince the Republicans to take the next step. So here's Elon Musk. Because not requiring ID combined with mail-in voting makes it completely impossible to prove fraud. Asking why don't Democrats want voter ID? But here's the interesting thing. They do. Every side of this is now calling for digital identification. Just because they don't say we want voter ID for vote, it's the same point. If they're all calling for digital identification, it's the same point. And they are. Both sides, or rather just your government, is driving you in the direction of digital identification because that's a sustainable development goal. Not just one side, both of them. But because the right makes it only about voter ID and frames it as the left doesn't want that, in that context, it suddenly becomes we want digital ID, but they don't say that. They say we want the SAVE Act because that'll ensure it. But we already showed you in the last show, the Biden administration's already running forward with the mobile driver's license discussion. So what those two things together do is remove the other options from the SAVE ID Act, which only leaves real ID compliant choices, which is the point. I said, and this is Elon Musk saying that, requiring ID. And I said, yes, but the U.S. government, all of it, will use this opening to require digital identification for everyone. But you seem more than okay with that. We don't need digital identification to secure voting, assuming that it translates to the outcome currently, or to enforce immigration law. We don't. We can do these things, which I do think are important, without the real ID compliant digital identification, both of which, though, are overlap with that, as I've already proven to you in this very show. But I know a lot of conservatives see this, but pretty much all of the team sport politic Republicans are blinding themselves to this, just like the left. Under whatever guise they're pushing this forward, the point is they use the wedge issues to convince you that it's necessary. And he is on a tear about it. Now, here's the actual article I'll include for you. Make sure you watch this. This is important. Again, Catherine and I are going to be talking about this explicitly tomorrow. Here, same thing, at multiple times a day. Here he is sharing a little meme, kind of meant to be a joke, right? It says, don't let Trump cheat. Demand voter ID, paper ballots. Like the point is, obviously, that's what they're saying the Republicans want, Democrats don't. So it's kind of a joke. Like, don't let him cheat. Because the point would be, arguably, if we don't want cheating, I would agree with the idea of identification and paper ballots. It makes sense. Poston, I've talked about this, about foreign elections. The point is that's not what they're actually driving for. Neither side. They'll use the voter ID aspect to drive it into digital identification. They just a thought sums this up clearly and says, when Trump becomes president, he'll use his fan base's fear of immigrants to manipulate them into supporting a smart wall, which, by the way, both are driving. We played the clip of Kamala Harris pushing the same concept. They're both discussing the biometric wall, which overlaps with digital identification, with CBDCs, all of it. She says this won't be used to keep people out as much as it'll be used to keep Americans in. Then he'll use the fan base's love of crypto to manipulate them into supporting CBDCs and digital ID. Whitney believes it's sort of a privatization concept, public-private partnership, maybe JB Diamond, that kind of way. Right? JP Morgan, some kind of private coin, but it will amount to the same thing. They just pretend it's not. And the Republicans will go along with it because it's endorsed by Elon and the rest of them. Trump is a Trojan horse, and if he's successful, she writes, we will be trapped in a digital prison. Don't pay your taxes? No leaving the country for you. Didn't get vaccinated? No access to your bank. Spoke out against the government? Watch that social credit score drop. Just wait. The next few years are going to be the craziest we've ever experienced. Now, I hope she's wrong. I hope we can actually fight back against this and not just blindly sleepwalk into the lesser of two evils, that both of which will drive you here. But she says, for those of you who are skeptical, start looking at it. This is the clip that Whitney and I have from our interview about the smart wall dynamic. Now, Sal Agris made a great point about just sharing this graphic. It's a graphic that shows basically the growth in productivity and hourly compensation comparatively since 1948. Now, it shows a very interesting point, right, in 1971, where suddenly your compensation basically flatlined, deviations here and there, while the productivity continued to explode. So what happened in 1971? I can tell you, we removed ourselves from the gold standard, Nixon. So what's interesting to think about here, we knew, going away from the whole Bretton Woods discussion into, like, the point is they shifted us into a different financial system using fiat currency so that they could manipulate you. And look at what they've done. They've increased your productivity while paying you the same. And that's just one of many aspects of how this was a manipulation. We're using fake money at this point. It's not based on any real value other than your belief that it has value. And they abuse that, printing money. The point that I'm showing you this for, what do you think is going to happen once we take the next step? The next step is all digital currency, which, by the way, we already have a level of digital overlap, but we still have physical currency. Now, once we step into this idea, once digital IDs become demanded, required, it'll immediately shift into the same direction. They will go into all digital currency. It's already happening. They're already pushing this around the world. What happens then? My belief is that we're going to see yet another graph just like this, far, far more concerning. I can't really predict what exactly it will look like, but my point is the reason this shifted is because they were able to manipulate what you thought you had, manipulate the value of what you were using. Can you only imagine what it will be when it's completely on? It's just digital ones and zeros. That's what they're driving for. That's what Trump and Elon and Thiel and Vance and Kamala and Biden and all of them are driving you into right now. Now, the biometric wall is an obvious overlap to this. And it is the same conversation under the guise of immigration, right? So let me play this for you. So set up the next point, just so we can see it again, the biometric wall, just in case you haven't heard him say this. Land, air, and sea. Now, it's not a new clip, but it is still his discussion. It's still his direction. He even just criticized Kamala for saying it, because that's my thing. They're both driving you in the direction of this wall, which will be digital IDs. It'll be biometric scans. It will include digital identification, digital money, everything. That's the direction of it. Not the wall explicitly with the money, but they're one in the same direction. One will necessitate the other. It is all happening.
We will finally complete the biometric entry-exit visa tracking system, which we need desperately. For years, Congress has required biometric entry-exit visa tracking systems, but it has never been completed. The politicians are all talk, no action, never happens, never happens. Hillary Clinton, all talk. Unfortunately, when there is action, it's always the wrong decision. Do you ever know?
Right. And then he stood up 30 seconds later and said, they're good people. Leave them alone. And we're good now. Unity. Right. And then went right back to calling her whatever else. These things are the same conversation. This is ridiculous. This is the same time frame. One thing over here, one thing over there. It's manipulation. Point is, like I said last time, by saying Hillary didn't do it, you're supposed to be tricked into thinking, well, then we should do it. Do it, Trump, because Hillary couldn't. That's how simple they think you are. Prove them wrong.
Notice, in my administration, we will ensure that this system is in place. And I will tell you, it will be on land, it will be on sea, it will be in air. Yep. We will have a proper tracking system.
Good. Yeah, isn't that what we all want? Weren't we all clamoring for a biometric tracking system during COVID-19? Oh, no, it was the opposite. Funny how a different narrative and we all just jump for are the ones that are. The truth at the end of the day, ask yourself why you would need a air biometric. So if we're talking about illegal immigration, are they flying jumbo jets into the, I mean, the point is coming and going. Land, air, and sea. That's what it is. And they're going to say, well, we have to make sure we don't miss anybody. But guess who that affects more than anybody? You, Americans, by design. So here is what B. Caldwell highlighted, what I think is interesting. Found this, so this is what Donald J. Trump is talking about. This is why globalists create chaos and misery. It motivates ignorant buffoons and gives government license to create invisible shackles for our safety. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Good catch, B. Caldwell. Thank you for sharing this. Here it is. Silicon Valley jumps into biometric gold rush for Trump's other border wall. Well, who do you think these Silicon Valley overlaps are, guys? It's all the same people that are currently stacking his cabinet right now. It says under President Trump's, this is 2017, by the way, under his technology companies have started cashing in on the little noticed government push to ramp up the use of biometric tools, such as fingerprints and iris scanners to track people who enter and exit the country. You notice how they don't say illegal immigrants? Just people who are coming and going, largely you. Silicon Valley firms that specialize in data collection are taking advantage of the provision tucked into Mr. Trump's executive order on immigration. See how that works? Which includes his controversial travel ban that we can see even that itself was used to kind of hide the bigger story. Oh, a Muslim ban, which there in a lot of overlaps, there was a point to be made, but this was not the point. The ban wasn't the point. The point was what he's got going on here. It says that called for a completion of the biometric entry-exit tracking system for screening travelers entering and leaving the United States. See? Everyone. The tracking system was mandated in 1996 immigration law passed by Congress, but never fully implemented. So that's going to be the way this gets covered. He's just doing what was supposed to happen. That's what he said. Do you want this? Is this what whether or not you think it's supposed to happen, is that what you want, conservatives? Do you want a biometric tracking system of coming and going from the country, as well as the 100-mile, that's what it was, Constitution-free zone. Why couldn't I remember that the other day? I kept saying unconstitution. The Constitution-free zone around the United States. This is an undeniable reality. The ACLU covered this. There's a 100-mile zone on the border of this country that goes into the country where the Constitution doesn't apply according to our government. The entire state of Maine exists in that location. The point is that what you want? Do you want that to be extended to the reality wherever inside this country you are being subjected to the? Obviously, that's not what we want. Don't be played by the Republican team sport politics narratives. As Catherine keeps saying, don't let the Republicans trick the conservatives into the control structure. The point is, guys, this is where it's going. And these same people are what we're talking about. And as Patriot Girl points out, same clip here about the biometric tracking system in the wall, as who owns the most Palantir stock? Well, of course, Palantir, Peter Thiel, overlapping Vance and Trump and everything else and the involvement therein, and the overlapping of the COVID-19 tracking system of working with Israel to kill Palestinians, all of that's actually happening. What do you know? Palantir, largest stockholders, Vanguard, BlackRock, just like Rumble, by the way. Palantir Technologies. Here's what's interesting, though. 42.46% of all the shares were held by institutions. Top institutional holders, Vanguard, BlackRock. Morgan Stanley, a little ways down. Almost 15% in total. That's very influential. Isn't it funny how these things don't matter? Like, if this was Biden's campaign or Kamala's, oh my God, there'd be 45 articles written about it all across these controlled platforms. Why is it not the other way around? Isn't that interesting? I frankly think it's obvious. As Derek wrote in August 1st, the co-opting of Bitcoin Nashville, Peter Thiel, Donald Trump, and Rumble, and the overarching point of how we're watching this was about specifically cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, but the bigger picture in this article is about Peter Thiel and the co-opting of the entire discussion, the administration, the building of this, which, by the way, happens every time. Remember Obama with Citibank? Right? The same thing. We see these outlines. This is how our country operates. We live in some kind of oligarchy, or what's the other term for it? Corporatocracy, where we're talking about fascism. We're talking about, and that's not about Trump. It's about all of them. The idea of this game where it's communism, when she's a communist, she's a socialist, and he's a capitalist. No, they're all authoritarian capitalists. They're all control. That's what they're all trying to put you in a position where they can manipulate you. They don't care what you call each other as long as they get to control your life. And this is what we're seeing. We're watching the corporations influence the outcome. That's what fascism is, the overlapping, blurring the line between corporate entities and your government. Now, Whitney's talked about this as well. That's what we referenced on July 18th. The man behind Trump's VP pick is worse than you think. That's Vance, who is a puppet of Thiel, it seems, the person who hated Trump, who got placed on his administration as the vice president that they just went along with. And Thiel is a huge backer of all of it. And by the way, Eric Schmidt, as Derek has highlighted, is backing on the other side of this. So it's Silicon Valley, as Whitney's highlighted, basically pulling these strings. Now here is what the CEO of Palantir said. And this should alarm everybody. So remember, this is the CEO of the company that is essentially the privatization of the government contract around surveillance of the United States people, right? She talks about the main core, about LifeLog, all these different discussions that they basically turned into the privatized Palantir. But what it is the whole constitutive government discussion that should we get in a position where the government feels insecure, that they're going to potentially lose control, well, they have a list of people, probably include people like myself, that are problematic, that are immediately meant to be rounded up. That's what Palantir's working with. That's what they're doing. As well as surveilling you, as well as surveilling Palestinians for Israelis to murder, as well as surveilling you and your data around COVID-19 injections. They are a part of the machine, the problem. That is backing Donald Trump's administration explicitly. The same administration working with everybody else telling you they're saving free speech, but here is what the CEO of Palantir had to say about saving free speech.
Almost everyone in America is horrified by the dramatic rise of anti-Semitism, which does not receive the reaction it deserves. And most Americans would like to see leadership on the Middle East, on bringing hostages home, especially American hostages, and clear statements about discrimination, even discrimination against Jews. I feel, though, I think part of the reason why leaders need to stand up is...
By the way, sitting next to the Borla of Pfizer.
This is a very, very, very small minority of America. They succeed in having an outsized impact simply because the rest of America thinks they're so idiotic that this can't actually be dangerous or true. But it is dangerous, and they do believe these things. And if we do not speak up, they will continue to tell themselves this, and there will be a sense on their side that it's okay to push the boundaries and push.
Guess what? Even if what he's saying is true, that's called free speech, but he's also wrong. It's also a very gross and obviously proven to be misrepresented topic. Remember, one of the most obvious points was that they called every single Palestinian protest an anti-Semitic entity or incident. And that's why they claimed it's rose 600%. That's what they're citing, guys. That's what they're claiming. She stabbed me. He stabbed me in the eye with a flag. No, you lied about that. They were chanting, kill all the Jews. Nope, the police said that didn't even happen and you made it up. It's everywhere. I'm not going to say there's not racism. There's obviously racism, but to pretend that this is what they claimed it was, even though we know as a matter of fact that there was not just flagrant lies, but active psychological manipulations carried out by Israel. It's undeniable. The bottom line is they're telling you that they're not allowed to have these opinions. First, the point is it didn't happen, not the way they're claiming it. But just say there's somebody out there saying, I think this about Jewish people. I can call that person a disgusting human being, but he has every right to say his opinion, whether online or anywhere else. That's free speech. If you're not okay with that, then be clear about the fact that you do not believe in free speech. And you know what? Maybe that's the way it should be. I disagree. But you're allowed to have that opinion, but lying and calling it free speech because you want to pretend free speech is, this selective conversation, then you're lying to yourself.
The boundaries and push the boundaries. And so as heinous as what these people are saying is, it exists in part because there are not enough people saying this is really dumb.
But see, that's not true at all. People all over the place are saying that's gross, you're bad, that's a disgusting thing to say. What you want is somebody stepping up and making them stop, making sure they're not allowed to say that. That's what you're calling for. But you see how it's careful not to actually say that.
This is hatred and it will not be tolerated. Again, not eviscerating the First Amendment, but just using the First Amendment to say, hey, this is either stupid or hateful.
Okay, but so what you're saying is you're calling on governments to stand up and say, you're bad. We don't like what you're doing. Is that are you honestly pretending that you're expecting a control that you want? I mean, it's a joke. You know exactly what he's calling for. They're all wanting the government to stop you from doing things, to stop you from saying those things, usually in the interest of stopping you from criticizing government action through the guise of that. But that's just a flimsy way to pretend like we just want you to we want them to say that. No, that's what's already happening. The First Amendment exists. People can already call it out. So what you're calling for is what's already here. When you know that's not what you want.
It's very hard to know whether you're an idiot or you're a demigod or you're just purely a hateful person. But we disagree.
Wow. So she frames it. Palantir CEO Alex Karp, whose company's data mining software helps the IDF kill machine to select targets, including 18,000 innocent children. Very true. says we need to scrape the First Amendment to target anti-Semitism in America. That's not what he said exactly, but he did very clearly suggest that we need action to stop you from saying these things. Now here is, oh, it didn't pop up. Oh, I spelled it wrong. I think it's that one. Peter Thiel's Palantir. Israel agreed a strategic partnership for battle tech. Just in case you wanted to have the evidence around that, which you should. How that's, think about it. This is a genocide that we all can see. That company is helping. And by the way, that's him right there. Speaking about anti-Semitism while he's literally standing next to the most, and that's Thiel right there next to him. While he's standing next to and with the people committing the most obvious genocide we've ever seen. That's pretty disgusting. In fact, I find that more grotesque than people who are simply being racist. Now, I shouldn't even say it like that because it's, I mean, it's important. We should care that people are saying, they are being disgusting to other human beings. But in the bigger context of things, if you're murdering children, I kind of think that's more important. Now here is Trump with the other clip telling you what he wants with the internet. Let's connect the dots here and recognize this is where it's going.
Because we're losing a lot of people because of the internet. And we have to do something. We have to go see Bill Gates and a lot of different people that really understand what's happening. We have to talk to them, maybe in certain areas, closing that internet up in some way. Somebody will say, oh, freedom of speech, freedom of speech. These are foolish people.
Yeah, you're a fool for caring about freedom of speech, Trump says.
We have a lot of foolish people. We have a lot of foolish people. We've got to maybe do something with the internet because they are recruiting by the thousands.
That's terrifying. Now, wrapping with the two main points here, and I'm going to get to some of the Israel stuff in the next show. This was the part about the technocratic regime change, kind of one of the main points I wanted to get to, but this is incredibly important. So what we're highlighting here is this obvious build towards, really the illusion, the construct that gets you stepping into willingly the thing they're building for you. What I see coming in the future is, this is, in my opinion, I almost wanted to frame it like the first technocratic regime change, but for all I know, it's happened many times. But I can see the outlines of this, and I see this as the kind of the future of where we're going, and it worries me, like that we don't fully even understand the new dynamic. The idea that it's not about governments and nation states, but more so this, as we keep seeing, the building of this sort of technocratic elitists that are dictating the actions of the world. Garrison Lovely makes this interesting point, September 3rd. The article is How a Startup Utopia Became a Nightmare for Honduras. Seems like more people should be talking about how a libertarian charter city, which I don't think is what this was, right? This is my point about how people like Peter Thiel pretend they're libertarians, using the guise of the kind of right-leaning libertarian freedom movement to hide what they're really doing. Authoritarian technocracy. But a libertarian charter city startup funded by, guess who? Sam Altman, Mark Anderson, Peter Thiel. Really? Yeah, sure, libertarian, right? And is trying to bankrupt Honduras. So what are we actually looking at here? Is this an effort to control the state? Is this an effort to influence financially? Is this an effort to test out this style? I mean, ultimately what you're going to see, excuse me, is these are technocrats, under the guise of starting some libertarian utopia, which, by the way, on top of that, makes it seem like that's impossible, which it's not, have taken advantage of this situation and are now using that to basically, what's the right word, to not incapacitate, but financially cripple this entire country, which I guarantee was step one to something bigger. And we have to recognize how this is something that overlaps with, I mean, look at what Elon Musk is doing. Look at the way he engaged with the Venezuela conversation. Like, we're watching, and again, this is not about whether they're allowed to say these things, but there has to be a conversation. That's my point about what she was saying, almost in a way to hide that there has to be some level of responsibility here. And I'm not saying Kamala Harris and censorship. That's not even remotely what I'm saying, but the reality is obvious. If we have these technocrats, these oligarchs, which, by the way, they've always been doing this, but in a new way, using some kind of technological overlap to explicitly, like, let's put it this way. Over history, we've seen let's say social media forward. We've seen the US government, for example, use social media to manipulate the conversation, but then ultimately use this kinetic effort, whether military or activist or moderate rebels, to ultimately overthrow a government or to drive that into reality. But the social media played a central role. Maybe we're seeing the switch of this, where now we have the whatever's on the backside of it, whether it's people or government or military, but we have the technocratic social media sort of front part of this. Whatever that ultimately resembles being sort of the lead, and ultimately it's the other way around. Like, I'm just kind of hypothesizing here, but at the end of the day, this is an obvious conversation about how this could have been an organized effort to essentially take control of this country under the guise of some kind of technocratic startup. I mean, you can see this happening with a company. Don't forget, like Pfizer and COVID-19 illusion. Remember all the contracts they had that literally forced these governments to put their military assets and their country's assets on the line for the contract. And should they have challenged that, they were going to lose their government assets. I just think that's wild. That is this new direction. So let me see. You'll see as we go through this. So, setting up what they claim was a libertarian charter city funded by Sam Altman, Mark Andreessen, and Peter Thiel. It was called Prospera. And they're suing Honduras for $11 billion. The GDP of the entire country is $32 billion. And apparently they're expected to win, according to the New York Times. That will collapse this country. Do you think that's good for the people of Honduras? Wild. Now, remember, Derek wrote about Sam Altman in 2023. Artificial intelligence, the Bilderberg Group, and WorldCoin. This was the whole thing. They're trying to get you to scan your irises to give you free cryptocurrency. Remember that? Funny how relevant that seems to become right now. This is not some passing thing for some nuance. This is very important. Your biometric data, as I've said so many times, and it's only going to become more alarmingly accurate as we go forward. I don't even think we fully understand what this is going to mean 10, 20 years from now. Digital twins and the way this all works. I mean, seriously, even then, right? What I'm picturing, I don't even think we can grasp what this will be used for. Why they're so surreptitiously trying to gather this information. Could just be control and surveillance, but frankly, I think it's more than that. But going on, it says basically the libertarian charter city, or a startup named Prospera, made a deal with the corrupt, oppressive, post-coup government in Honduras. So who do you think was driving the coup? Right? The reality is that we're already dealing with some Western regime change, destabilization tactics. So this could have been a test bed for some new effort. Now, they use this post-coup government in Honduras to get special economic status. The status was the result of court packing and is wildly unpopular. A Democratic government is trying to undo the deal. This is what he's framing it as anyway. Take this all with a grain of salt. The point is essentially that they manipulated the judicial system to add more judges to make sure they got what they wanted, which, by the way, is what they're all doing. Israel is this game they play where they've got an independent judiciary has been self-evidently not the case for years. And it's been called out. They did, and it's what one of the biggest issues they have with Netanyahu is that he's trying to do this to make sure he doesn't go to jail. Over here, your government's going, we don't need to investigate ICC. They've got an independent. They don't. Their own people call it out. The point, though, is that they do the same thing with the way they manipulate the judicial system for their own benefit. But in this case, we're dealing with another country, so they're court packing. But they're dealing with a government that was likely put in place in order to get the special status that they gained in order to get themselves in this position. To me, that seems very, very set up. But it says in 2021, the United Nations expressed strong concern over Honduran ZEDs, I guess, stated that they posed a potential threat to human rights in Honduras. The UN estimated that ZEDs could wind up controlling approximately 35% of the country's territory. That same year, Honduran corruption watchdog published a scathing report on ZEDs, it's a political entity, highlighting the opportunity, at least front-facing, highlighting the opportunity they provide for corrupt actors to engage in money laundering and other illegal activities. So we'd literally be talking about some kind of, realize with Ukraine on being very scrutinized, we'll watch the kind of money laundering hub that they've been using it for. Certainly possible they needed a new location that wasn't so on display. I'm just spitballing, but nonetheless, we have to recognize how obvious the U.S. government and Israel manipulation we can see in these locations, and whether this was something that was put into place in order to justify a new location for this, and this whole technocratic angle of it could be a new effort. Yeah, saying, very unpopular political entity, but somehow has most control is the main point. But it goes on to say, in response, Prospera is suing the government for 2/3 of its annual state budget. Right? So it says ZDs are highly unpopular in Honduras. The slogan, "No to ZDs," featured prominently in Castro's electoral campaign. Shortly after the inauguration, the Honduran Congress voted to repeal the law that allowed for the creation of ZDs, a broad-based national movement against the ZDs in defense of sovereignty, which was formed under the prior government that includes unions, indigenous groups, human rights organizations, prominent academics, and also pressing Castro to shut down ZDs down. The point is, you can see, like I said, that clearly the momentum, the actual democratic support of what they want is not what's actually happening. But in April 2022, a few months after his inauguration, the new Honduras Congress made up an array of parties on the right and left, voted unanimously to repeal the ZD law. But Prospera, this foreign entity boasting strong and legal stability protections protected by international treaty for the minimum of 50 years, was prepared for this eventuality. So they needed this to maintain what they were doing. In December 2022, Prospera announced that it was seeking arbitration, at the International Center for Settlement and Investment Disputes for a sum of nearly $10 billion, 10.8. Here we are right back. We were just talking about the forced arbitration based on contracts. In the absence of any sizable investment, Prospera's case was hedging its bets on the loss of future profits. So they're suing the government for almost $11 billion. An op-ed in Foreign Policy states the suit's success would simply render the country bankrupt. The longer story appears to be 2009 military coup results in corrupt and oppressive post-coup government. 2011, the government decrees special employment and economic development zones called ZDs. 2012, Honduras Constitutional Court finds decree unlawful, so Honduran Congress swaps out judges for pro-ZD judges. 2013, new court rules in favor of ZDs. 2017, Prospera ZD grant official status. So, it took over a process of years, but you can see how this being manipulated gets to a point to where you can then just get, the idea that you could ever be in a position where you're granting special this is like the United States government giving a part of a state to some new startup. They're making this their own little area. This is not what any government seems like they would ever allow. So this seems like a very clear manipulation using regime change tactics. November 2021, center-left government led by Honduras' first female president takes power. April 2022, new government votes unanimously to repeal the ZD law. That's where essentially we're currently at. It says in a few months after the inauguration, 2022. Oh, that's the part we just read a second ago. Now it says December 2022, Prospera announced that it was seeking arbitration at the International Center for Settlements, which we read. At the end, it says its affiliates filed an astronomical $10.775 billion lawsuit against the state in a World Bank tribunal called, as we referenced, the Settlement of Investment Disputes. Prospera is thought to have a good chance of prevailing in part. I don't even know how in the world this makes sense that you can have, who exactly, it just doesn't make logical sense to me. Or in this, I guess it's different depending on what Western versus these entities that have been couped and destabilized. But imagine trying to sue the United States government for 1/3 of its GDP. It just seems like a fantastical thing that doesn't even make sense based on what's actually going on and what they're actually doing. Since Prospera is incorporated in Delaware and has received support from the U.S. ambassador to Honduras and the State Department. Surprise, surprise. Despite Biden's stated opposition to these kinds of investment state arbitrations. So not only is it the arbitration conversation, but this is backed by the U.S. State Department. And I want to be clear. In no way is this about, my opinion, that it's Biden versus Trump. I think this is a clear government manipulation using, and again, to be clear, we're talking about Peter Thiel project, which guarantee is going to be supported by the Trump administration that's happening next. But it says, this guy says, I've never heard of the ICSID. My opinion is that's just basically a arbitration setup settlement system for these kind of high-level government manipulations, I would guess. It's my opinion. But it sounds like he says a thought experiment dreamt up by leftists trying to show the absolute worst side of capitalism. How funny is that? He could be right. He literally could be right. This is about setting up the idea to make it look like this doesn't work. But let's be real. Just as many examples the idea that capitalism works and socialism doesn't, or vice versa, guys, these are political games that are being used to keep you blind to the bigger picture. Every single type of government can very clearly, and usually does, end up collecting power at the top. So it's funny that he clearly leans one direction, and he's simply highlighting this as it could be. This is about the Democrats or anybody on the left trying to create a situation that makes it look like capitalism doesn't work in order to drive you into socialism. But I think either way, either narrative, that doesn't make sense to me. That this would be the other side of it. They try to convince, the same dynamic in the other way would be them trying to convince you that democracy works and socialism doesn't. I don't think they care. I think it's about getting you in a position where you are under their control. Government does that. And historically, you can look around and see, look at, like I keep saying, look at where we are in this country. It's obvious. And I don't think, and it's embarrassing to pretend that Kamala or anybody else is even remotely socialism or communist. It's not the case. But it works for narratives. And I'm not saying I support it. I don't support any government, let alone socialism or communism. But it says this is what the new presidents had to say about the special economic zones. Every millimeter, he says, of our homeland that was usurped in the name of the sacrosanct freedom of the market, ZDs, and other regimes of privilege was irrigated with the blood of our native peoples. Now, you could make that about free markets, but let's not pretend that we even have that in this country. We're always being played by these narratives. The bottom line is using these kind of manipulations, using government manipulations in order to take control from a government that you want to take, or even just as an individual. You could talk about companies doing this. But the bottom line is you're taking from Honduras for your benefit under the guise that they somehow have circumvented your contract. But at the end of the day, what they're doing is what the people want. Again, you could argue that's not the case, but let's just take it for sake of conversation. That does appear to be the reality. At what point? So now we're at the point where you can say that your contract supersedes democracy? Yes, this is the direction they're going in. This is the technocratic idea. They know better, right? The idea of technocracy is the scientists and the engineers, and the original concept are smarter than the politicians, which frankly I agree with. But that's not what it is today. We're talking about these elitists that just tried to push during COVID-19. We're seeing the same thing in foreign policy, trying to take control of your lives. He says Prospera is funded by Pronomus Capital, which is advised, among others, by Balaji S. Srinivasan, a former partner at Anderson Horowitz, we've talked about, who wants to partner with police to take over San Francisco. Some people might call this impulse fascistic. But realize we're talking about the same people that are working alongside Peter Thiel and the rest that are funding this current administration on the right. He says, so Silicon Valley billionaires, and this is what Whitney's been pointing out, are backing a project that is trying to bankrupt the poor country for reneging on a deal struck with people who have been indicted on corruption, drug trafficking, weapons charges. The groups that's what the U.S. State Departments are supporting because they're easily manipulated. That's how they work with all of these people, the moderate rebels, the Saudis, people that are, or the Israel funding Hamas. And so they are working with the very elements they use to make their case for how they need to exist. Right? That's the point we've always made. They're funding the most radical elements of what they claim they're fighting because the people that are not willing to bend over and let them take what they want. So they go with the people that are radical, and then they claim the radicals are there, and that's why we have to fight. It's all manipulation. He's saying these same billionaires want to build a superhuman AI ASAP. You're right. And it largely seems to be on the right more than anything right now. And that's not a left-right point. They're using that paradigm to get you goose-stepping, sleepwalking right in to that direction. He says, and are vigorously resisting regulation of such technology. If you'd like to see how they've governed the world with a super intelligent AI, it might be instructive to see how they act now. California's AI safety bill is a mask-off moment for the industry. Clearly, he's got a left, that's the problem. But the reality is this is not, if you actually look at the people behind this, they're all backing Trump's administration. He says, my good friend Ian McDowell has a fantastic story on Prospera with Isabel Simpson and the rest of the world a few years back. The roots of this story can be found here. You can read more if you want. I find this to be a fascinating story. Bottom line again, pretending to be a libertarian charter city, Sam Altman, Mark Anderson, Peter Thiel, creating an entity that essentially is circumventing what the people want in the country for their benefit, suing them based on that, and working with a illegitimate coup entity in the first place, working alongside the U.S. government. These are the realities of what's actually happening. And as Stella Bell points out, it's actually not libertarian. It's techno-fascism. Exactly. That's the point. Now, overall, in the interest of time, unfortunately, I'm going to have to break off here. I'm going to get into this, like I keep saying, into the next discussion. What I was going to go over to end here was the point, and this is going to take more time than I want to make sure we go through this in depth. Ben Swan put up a great post about Brazil, and the overarching point is simply that we're seeing the same thing, right? We're watching Elon Musk as a technocratic oligarch billionaire government contractor abuse this power in all sorts of fields. Now, that's not even remotely to say that Brazil is acting correct. Brazil is censoring. Brazil is doing the same things. So that both those things can exist in the same conversation. Now, Elon Musk is centering himself or setting himself up to be the counterbalance to that, but he's doing the same things. Just because they're only at odds in the sense that in this moment, his interest in what he's doing with X and Twitter in Brazil is against what he wants in the ground. I mean, even consider for the moment that maybe Elon is doing something that makes that person actually have just cause to make sure he's not. I don't know. Again, what Brazil's doing in regard to censorship is wrong. But it's amazing that just that alone, that point can make people assume that Elon isn't it possible that he's using that situation to benefit himself? I mean, again, you have to recognize that he's being subjective. Brazil is only one aspect of a larger dynamic. There's plenty of other countries that he's acquiesced and censored. They're just not talking about it. I think that's important. But we'll address this in the next show, as well as the Telegram honeypot point I wanted to come back to. And here's the email that Rumble put out. Free speech under attack. A note from the CEO of Rumble. And he basically goes on to say, Brazil, they're censoring. But he goes, Rumble is no longer available to Brazil, joining the ranks of France, Russia, and China. Now, let's not forget, by the way, this is not to say that they should be doing this. But let's remember that Russia and China and the rest have removed a lot of these platforms because it's undeniable that these platforms are being used by U.S. intelligence. We all should know that by now. It's not even a secret. So they could be doing it for that reason, but also because they just want to censor. Both those things can exist. But they have a logical reason to be concerned about that, like the removal of NED and US aid, excuse me, because they know what they're being used for. Regime change, infiltration, destabilization. Right? That's not to say that they should be able to censor, but the point is that there's an obvious point there. And the same point when you see how these things might be working, it's interesting to think about. But it says Brazil no longer has Elon Musk Twitter due to attacks by free speech. But it says the world powers don't want Rumble. See how they love to frame themselves as the one. They don't want Twitter. They don't want Telegram. They don't want Truth Social. You went too far right there. The point is clearly it's about their leaning direction. Truth Social, and not even in any way remotely is on the same page, even as Telegram and Rumble and the rest. But they included it because it's about Trump and the election and politics. That's the point, which should make you give you pause. Which, by the way, in general, is why what we're doing is so important. Here's the tweet we put out. Derek put this out on the 27th of August, announcing the Independent Media Alliance. Which with what's going on right now with the tenant media point and all of this, I mean, look, I recommend that you express skepticism and caution, but don't blindly assume. Watch what's happening. Listen to this. Be skeptical. Dive through this, and you'll see for yourself, if you care enough to look, that this will be radically transparent. And in fact, is really at this point nothing more than a loose overlapping of other people that we think fit this bill for objective and honest work. Panels, interviews, but we are working on some kind of background idea. We're currently talking with different entities in the background. We'll show you in a second. One of them is Odyssey, about potentially building something for just for use. No funding overlap, nothing like that. It's just about trying to work with other people in the same mindset to reach real free speech and real information flow. The point is, I think this is very important right now, especially with what's going on. Now, I was going to get into one other point that I thought was really interesting about a person named Murray Rothbard, but I'm going to get into that in the next show and end with a couple points about Israel since we're going to bring it up. Well, actually, just these points here. In general, recognizing, as Whitney's going back and forth with RFK Jr., really just calling him out, as he calls out Candace Owens for discussing a rabbi named Mention Sherson. RFK Jr. is going out of his way to say you're wrong and you're in fact racist for saying this person is a supremacist. Well, the problem is that he is, and you can listen to him in his own words. He's open to what he discusses. It's very clear. And Whitney calls him out for this, saying he is absolutely a supremacist in his own words. And it was other prominent Shabbat rabbis have long been pro-occupation, pro-greater Israel, and calling for brutality towards civilians in Israel or Palestine. And just says that, you're exposing yourself by doing this, or he doesn't know any better. There's that same video. Now, at the end of the day, here is Arnaud Bertrand highlighting another very, somebody who knows what he's talking about, a Harvard professor, Stephen Walt, saying Palestinian resistance is completely legitimate because international law explicitly says that populations under occupation have a right to resist. You know this. We'll go through it. Here's a new article from Haaretz. It's not Hamas that's collapsing, but Israel. The rest of the world sees this. For some reason, very select entities within the United States or Western countries are either choosing not to or just can't see this. The truth is obvious right now. There will be a reckoning. B'Tselem, the leading Israeli human rights group of the world, says point blank, the Israeli government places no value on human life. Realize they didn't specify, just simply no. That means Israelis and Jews and everything else. It says whether it's of Gaza subjects or its own citizens. Wow. It says Israel's killing the hostages in Gaza one by one. That's the Israeli human rights group. The world sees it. Oxfam highlights, this is a recent one. This is from, this is July 18th. Pretty sure I had a newer one. In any case, it doesn't matter. The point is war crimes. Using water to hurt people. Using water, using rape as a weapon, as a tool of war, using starvation as a tool of war, using everything they have to make these people suffer. I'll include this thread that goes over what they've been doing to Palestinians long before October 7th. Lastly, here's WikiLeaks. Target Israel and we will target you. ICC prosecutor says world leaders threatened him over Israel arrest warrants. We need to see the big picture here, guys. All of your potential candidates in the lesser of evils delusion are all blindly supporting the group that is clearly committing genocide that the world can see. It's time to have some constitution here, right? Some integrity. We need to stand by what we know is right and stop falling into the traps they present for us. Very important, guys. Thank you for tuning in today. I think this stuff needs to reach. It is reaching more of you. I know it every day. I could see it. Have the courage to stay the course. The wisdom to see the right path and the courage to stay the course, guys. It's right there in front of us. Don't fall for these petty games. It's just so simple, and I know we see it. I know we feel it. I know it's comfortable. It's easy to fall in with the people you think. Because largely people in those groups, you already kind of generally think that, even though you see some of these things, that, well, they're more like me than this side. It's all manipulation. The bottom line is, it doesn't matter what the group is doing. Follow your heart. Do what you know to be right. That will not lead you wrong. Thank you for being here. And if you're out there and you believe in what we're doing, and you believe in what we're building, we're fighting for, there's never been a more important time to support the last American vagabond. Now, on that note, I will include, let's do this. I want to make sure you guys see the location here. So if you're now, basically, I haven't brought this up, but the Truth Clothing store is about to shut down. Apparently, it's their own, it's personal dynamic for them. They're going to be moving on, and we're going to be shifting over to the Big Frog location. So if you'd like to support this platform in general, right on our homepage, you see lots of different ways: Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum. Really, we'll take anything out there. If you're interested in sending us crypto, reach out to me. We can set something up. But the point is, you're a Subscribe Star, Cash App, different subscribe. But here's the TLAV Apparel, Truth Clothing, Big Frog. So right now we've got some cool shirts on here. If you want to buy these, that does support our platform. Our Free Speech Absolutist shirt, or our They shirt, the hierarchy enslaving you. But until these actually sell out, we still have Truth Clothing. And what we're going to be setting up is basically these same shirts on the new store, so you guys can have that as well. But all the Question Everything shirts, all these different stickers and everything, all that supports our platform. But in general as well, just reaching out and donating through our donation portal, through any of the platforms you're watching on right now, our Subscribe Star, our Give, Send, Go platform, which I'm going to probably do another kind of fundraising thing here soon. And that'll be another place we can continue to do that. But the bottom line is, guys, we definitely need your support. Because, I've talked about it here and there, and I just hate getting into it, but I've just had a meeting with my lawyer today about what we're going to be doing with these lawsuits. I mean, it's not going to go away. And we're going to have to put a ridiculous amount to be able to push these people back to maintain what we're doing. And it may amount to something that we, with regard to the LLC going, I mean, it's not going to ever stop what I'm doing, regardless of whether they pretend that they've brought, the LLC is just a thing on a piece of paper as far as I'm concerned. This is what TLAV is. I'm going to keep doing that. But the bottom line is that it could end up affecting the reality of TLAV as a company and I don't know what that could look like. I mean, people could literally pretend that they're TLAV. You know what I mean? Like, the point is that I'm going to fight it with everything I have. But if you're out there and you've got the means to support us in regard to fighting back against this, and I don't mean necessarily, I mean, whatever that means to you, reach out to you. We are in need of your support. But the most important thing, as always, no matter what, is engaging with the content, asking these questions, sharing the content with your friends and family and people you want to inform, having these conversations, sharing the information. That's what matters to me more than anything. I'd rather you take the time to read this and care about it than sending anything. But if you want to do that too, then obviously we could use the help. So thank you for being here. I love you all, as always. Question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.